Hello there. Welcome back to the Senate Podcast. This is a special episode. So we're a Star Wars inspired podcast, but we also talk about pop culture. We talk about video games. We talk about movies, all that. So first, of course, I got to introduce my co-host, Tony Quinn. Tony, just go ahead, kick it off, man.
I mean, I'm a naturally anxious person, just generally, like when I do anything that's like putting myself out there in public. But I mean, this is like, like people say, Endgame was the greatest crossover in history. But I mean, no, Kevin Feige, your move, bro. Your move. So I'm stoked. I can't believe that, we're here with somebody you'll introduce. But I mean, this is crazy. I'm excited. This is going to be a fun episode. It's going to be crazy, unpredictable. We might not be friends by the end of this, but that's just how showbiz is. So
we can be friends now because in a little bit that's going to end. So I think the person you're talking about, you've been dying to talk to, is Kev. What's up, Kevin? How you doing?
What's up? I'm doing
Yeah,
good.
exactly.
Yeah, no, this is my first time talking to Tony. We've had quite the conversations over Discord. So it'd be interesting having it, as in person as we can be. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's going to be so much fun. So, Kevin, this is actually your second time back on, so welcome back. And then someone else, this is their second time back on. If you guys watch the video, I put out a lot of clips and some stuff last year. I had Jake James Lugo on, and he's back. So, Jake James, how you doing? Thanks for coming back, man.
Hey there. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, I'm glad to be around and see everybody here and say hi and just chill overall.
Awesome. Yeah, so last time we talked about a lot of good stuff, but we didn't talk enough about video games. So today I think we're going to remedy that. So I'm looking forward to getting into it. And then last but not least, this is his first time on here, and I'm actually super excited. Echo 22104. That's your tag on everything, but we're going to introduce you as Mr. Alex Santiago. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's going to be fun because I'm not going to spoil, but I can't wait to hear your reasoning for what you picked. So this is episode 50. And, I've been saying this in the last few episodes that a podcast is technically successful if they get a few episodes out, because the vast majority of podcasts don't get their podcast off the ground. Essentially, they only do maybe a few episodes and then it kind of just fizzles out. So we're on episode 50, and that's a huge accomplishment. So we did, I think it was episode 21 live, like a legit live show. It was super fun. And for episode 50, I want to do something a little different. I just wanted to have a very interesting topic and us kind of debate it. So this is what it's going to be. All right, you guys ready? This is the greatest console of all time debate. We all have a pick. If you don't, get it ready, because you're going to have to sway us. So this is what's going to happen. You're going to say, what the greatest console of all time is, and then you're going to make your case. All right? I'm going to give you maybe 5-10 minutes, however long you need. Not too long, but make your case, make it good. And then we're going to open it up for kind of questions. So everybody just keep an open mind on what you hear, because there's no rules, okay? Greatest console of all time can be anything, okay? It could be a Tamagotchi. I don't care. But if you make a great argument for it, that's all that matters. So then at the end, we will vote. We'll maybe have some categories, but we're going to vote on who had the best argument for the greatest console of all time. So you guys got it. There's no rules, so you guys can do whatever you want. That's the fun part. All right, so to kick it off, let's go with Tony, because I know you want to do something a little special. So here's what's going to happen, Tony. You're going to go ahead. We're going to listen to you just for a few minutes, all right? And then we're going to maybe try to pick apart your argument and kind of question if it is truly the greatest console of all time, because what makes it the greatest console of all time isn't just what you can say about it, but how you can defend it against critique as well. All right?
All right.
So here we go. Opening up the floor, Tony. Take it away.
Well, my pick for the greatest console of all time is the Nintendo Switch. Wait. Sorry. The Nintendo Switch. What's going? I know what happened. You know what? Have you heard about that Microsoft outage? It's like a global thing. It's affecting IT. So there's a glitch in the Matrix, which is why. So hold on. I have to call up the architect. I'm sorry, guys. I didn't. Yeah.
What's going on?
It's I'm trying to record an episode and it's glitching out. Can you fix this? If I remember, you're working for me. Yeah. All right. Fix it. Sorry about that. I had to fix the Matrix. Okay, everything is back on now. So, for real this time.
I'm so glad I had you go first.
I got it. Yes. Thank you, architect. The Nintendo Switch. All right, now I'm going to do what Eminem did in 8 Mile, and I'm going to say some stuff that I know you bozos are going to say, okay? The Nintendo Switch isn't the most powerful thing, okay? It runs some games poorly, okay? Graphically, not that impressive, right? Well, yeah, to an extent, Nintendo needs to stop having certain games be third party. Mortal Kombat, I'm looking at you. What the hell is that? Have you seen that footage? It's
That's pretty
embarrassing. It's a crime against humanity. After I saw that, I called up the United Nations because I'd witnessed a human rights violation. That was absolute nonsense. But the Switch can also run games well. I think some people forget that because they like to dunk on it because it's popular. Super Mario Odyssey runs great. Astral Chain, it's a hack and slash game, runs great. Xenoblade, there are 3 Xenoblade games on Switch. These expansive, big, open world games. And I've heard, I haven't played them, but I've heard certain Switch ports run surprisingly well. Nier Automata, Final Fantasy 12, so there are games on the Switch that run good that are even third party. So why do I think it's the greatest console? Well, GameStop's slogan is power to the players. Okay? What gives players more power, in my opinion? Now, when you're young and you don't really have much that you're doing in your life, you can just sit in your room and play games. But guess what? Inevitably, unless you're somebody who really doesn't have that many hobbies, which I envy you, honestly, but the majority of gamers that are adults, young or old, have lives. They have responsibilities. You know what's powerful? You know what's a flex? I could take this off the dock and I could play it at work. I could play it at my dad's house. I could play it at my cousin's. I could play it in an airport if I ever flew by myself, which I'm afraid to, but that's a whole other thing. I could play my games wherever. I could make progress in my games more consistently because when I'm at home, maybe I don't have the time to play my PS5, to play my Xbox, but I can consistently play my games on my Switch that I'm playing and make consistent progress. And that is something that only Nintendo's done as far as like a primary console that's also portable, and I think that's cool. I wish the PlayStation Move wasn't just like, it's a miniaturized PlayStation experience, but you can't leave your house. No, Nintendo was like, you can leave your house and you can play Xenoblade, you can play Zelda, you can play your third-party games, whatever. So that's why the Switch is the best console, not because it's the best console, but because it lets you play your games how you freaking want to play them, and you don't have to sacrifice your other commitments to play your games. And that is freaking awesome.
I respect that. I really respect that because it is, it's technically a hybrid console, like you're saying, and that's a part of your argument. I enjoy that. So, all right, let's pick this apart the best we can. Tony, we're gonna come at you. All right. Does anybody want to kick it off? I think Alex wants to.
I'm not surprised that he has something to say. Okay, Alex, go ahead.
Tony, so I understand the commitment is nice, right? And I understand Nintendo's really, it made a name for itself and whatnot. But, that's not only the only, mobile brand gaming. There's also like, the Steam Deck, that plays like more modern games that a lot of people like to play. You can't play Call of Duty on the Switch. That's a very famous one.
Can you play Steam games offline?
Yes,
I genuinely
I'm
don't
pretty
know.
sure.
That's why I'm asking.
Also,
Okay.
a question: you can
Pretty
also connect the Steam Deck to a monitor TV, right?
I believe so.
Okay.
And that one, I'm not quite sure. But I was also going to say, you say about the Switch, but there also is the Switch Lite. That one doesn't dock, so that one's always portable. So you kind of like, all right, but that's an off-brand of the Switch. But you might say, oh, it's not the greatest console, but it's the greatest console in your opinion. I would be like, okay, then will you change that when the Switch 2 comes out? So that means it will be inferior at that time. So is it really the greatest
only reason?
console?
Well, Nintendo never said anything about it being a Switch extension, as far as I know. People were just saying Switch 2 because 99% of the public shares one collective brain cell, so that's why they all.
Okay, that was all I had.
It could be
thought
no,
about
the Steam Deck is a fair argument, but my only argument against the Steam Deck is that not all Steam Deck games are certified on the Steam Deck. That's not to say you can't play them, but they're not certified, whereas obviously every Switch game is certified on Switch. Like it might not be the best experience, but it's saying you can play this on Switch. How great is it going to be? I don't know. Flip a coin, but you can play it on your Switch. Whereas Steam Deck, if I got one, I'd be like, oh, I can play a percentage of Steam's library on here optimally, and that's kind of not the greatest pitch in my opinion. If you want to play every Steam game, just buy a laptop or a PC at that point.
That is a bold.
Well, you want
choice.
it, but you said about being immobile because we have responsibility.
Yeah.
So I was trying to, make a comparison other than like a laptop.
Is it true that the Steam Deck's battery life is like 3 hours?
I think it also depends on the games and the specs.
Sure. I know that they made themselves another OLED compared to like the Switch OLED.
I just heard the battery life's
like
amazing. Really low, but I mean, I wouldn't know obviously.
But that was my argument. I'll give it over
That's
to
a good argument.
Caleb or Kev. Because he raised his hand too.
All right. Before Kev, before you go, Jake James, jump in here. What? Because Stinky Switch, that's a bold move, but it could be a good one.
I don't know if Tony's ready for what I'm about to say, but I'm pretty sure I think everybody
I'm ready. Bring it.
kind of understand where I'm coming from when I say this. The one thing that the Nintendo Switch has that many other generations prior to it, not just Nintendo but other companies, don't have as much. They probably do have in different ways, but not as much, is the idea of innovation and the idea of trying to redefine what gaming could be and where gaming could take place. That's the only thing that really the Switch has as its strength. Because beyond that, though, and unfortunately, as a detriment to that, that only takes the console so far, making it far behind what I can feel is probably the best console of all time. And the reason being is because at some point, not only will people easily move on from the Switch in a very short time frame, not just because of the Switch successor, but because of other technology. I think that the technology itself still has such a flimsy amount of mind share amongst people. There's a lot of people that would rather play a lot of the games, especially third-party games and multi-platform games, on other consoles other than a Switch. Even though there are Nintendo first parties that are done and made and developed for Nintendo hardware, which a lot of them are classics or great games or legendary games in their own right, you're not going to want to play The Witcher 3 on the Nintendo Switch. You're not going to want to play Mortal Kombat 1 or Mortal Kombat 11 on the Nintendo Switch. You're going to want to play it elsewhere. And it could be difference and preference from other people a variety of different ways amongst different types of people out there. However, as much as it's innovative for the Switch to take that type of home console experience on the go, unfortunately, it's not something that has a lot of staying power amongst a large amount of people. Not everybody, but a large amount of people that would rather play certain games, if not all their games, elsewhere, even if it means they can't take that experience with them on the go. And unfortunately, as cool as the Switch is, because I love my Switch, I love playing my games on Switch, either retro games or new games or whatever else. Unfortunately, it doesn't resonate with me as much in order to be looked at or at least seen definitively as one of the best of all time.
I mean, I think you made some great points. I will say though, some of the YouTubers and stuff that I watch that play things on Switch, like they're, for example, there's a YouTuber named FemTrooper, and she's not primarily she's primarily a Switch channel, and like she said that like when she was because she had a son like a few years ago, and when she was like pregnant, like when he was first born, like the only way she could play like RPGs was really like on her couch in her downtime on the Switch. And like for stuff like that, like you say people wouldn't want to play Witcher 3 on the Switch. Yeah, it's obviously an inferior experience, and for something like that, if you want it to be grand, yeah, play it on PC, PS5, Xbox, whatever. But like me personally, because of the hobbies that I have and then I'm trying to get into the habit of being consistent with, I would love to play The Witcher 3 on Switch because that's the only way I'd make. Like, I'm playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth now, and I don't even know if I'm halfway through the game, and I've got a lot of time, like over 50 hours. But like, if that was more of a scaled down game and I had the option to play it on Switch, you bet I would, just for the simple fact that I would complete it faster and I wouldn't have to be like, oh, let me wait till I have like 4 hours on my PS5.
You see, but that comes with one other problem that the Switch has with uniquely to the Switch. But you could even say this about other consoles. But with the Switch, since we're focusing on that now, that's a situational thing. That's different. And it's very inconsistent amongst various people because not everybody has those same like scenarios. Not everybody has those same situations. Not everybody has those same options for or against with it. And again, it becomes so wildly inconsistent, and it's hard to really pin it down to like one definitive way to look at it because everybody's like standing with not just Switch, but with gaming and life stuff as a whole. That's why it's so all over the place. That's another one of the reasons why I can't look at it as like definitively one of the best, because again, it might be cool to play The Witcher 3 on a Switch. It might be cool to play Mortal Kombat on a Switch. It might be cool to play any other third-party game or again, various different types of indie games you want to play on a Switch because it's on the go and stuff. But do you really think for the majority of those games, or even the majority of the time, are you thinking like this is where I want to play it? Because definitively for some of those experiences, I would argue a good chunk of them, you want to play it elsewhere. You want to have an actual what that experience is meant to be or meant to feel like for one reason or another. And again, it's different for every game.
And that's a great, that's a great,
that's fair
point. And it's so hard to narrow down the greatest console of all time. And I think that's it's such an interesting conversation. And we're already into the details, into the minutia of this, starting out with the Switch and even what it means to be a console, because you're bringing up, hybrid console, accessibility and portability and whatnot, which is super cool. So, all right, Kevin, before you go, I just want to say too, Tony, I think you did have some good counterpoints as well, because here's the thing at the end. We're gonna do some voting, and we can't vote for ourselves. So even if you disagree with the person, if they make the better argument over somebody else, then that's how you do it. Tony, I think you had some good rebuttals, but I think Kevin's gonna get you right here. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, sorry, Tony. I really do apologize in advance. I know I've done this to you quite a bit.
I'm about to end this whole man's career.
I'm about to end the water. You're right. I know your very first point. I know you really tried to brush it to the side, but it's the most obvious one. I mean, it's why he started off with it. It's not powerful. And for me, if you're gonna have the greatest console of all time, you can't have an obvious negative. You can't have an obvious downside. I'm sure with the rest of us we're gonna have a different console, and I hope that before they give out their answer, they kind of think about that too. It cannot have an obvious downside. There's been too many consoles made to go and pick one that has an obvious downside, which is power. Okay, if your console isn't powerful, it doesn't become priority, and if you're not the priority, then you're not respected. When a game is made on a Switch, like The Witcher, like Mortal Kombat, like whatever, it's always the last second. Like when you go to make The Witcher, you don't go to making The Witcher. Okay, well, how are we going to port this on the Nintendo Switch? You're just not. It's always an afterthought. I mean, Mortal Kombat, it was an afterthought. When you play Mortal
Kombat, Legacy.
Hogwarts Legacy, it's an afterthought. Yeah. It's okay. Can we get a little bit more cash in on our video game that we just made? Well, okay, let's get some kids that, I want to play the Hogwarts, but I don't have an Xbox, or I don't have a PlayStation or PC, one of these consoles that the games were specifically made for. And my goodness, I can't believe you did it. But we're not bringing an argument. We're not using our argument. And then inviting GameStop into this. Like I love GameStop. I'm probably like one of the only 1,000 people that are a pro member to it. But they're a dying business, and
You
we're
really
not.
are.
I can't believe you brought GameStop into this.
It was just purely for what the slogan
the
says.
slogan.
Care, yeah.
Power to the players. Honestly, the slogan to the Nintendo Switch should be "We need more power." Just begging the business for
Honestly.
help, please. How do we make this console more powerful? And the
All right.
yeah,
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
The last part is the on the go part, idea is that's really cool and all, but that really limits your audience. When you're on the go as an adult, you're normally the one driving, or you're only the one. Even if you're not driving, you're flying. Well, you generally have more bigger responsibilities than trying to play a game for an hour or two. So the on the go part, it's very specific for kids on the bus rides, on the car rides. The mobility is convenient, and it is something that these other consoles don't really have. But even then, I just don't think it brings it back up from the lack of power.
I want to add real quick. I just told when Jake James was talking, it reminded me of the PS5 has a remote play that can be used apparently anywhere with your phone. So practically, it's on the go PlayStation 5. So I would have to rebuttal
Actually,
that.
didn't know
You could
That's
Sony
actually a
did
great
that.
point. I actually use that
Yeah.
myself. Yeah.
You
But, yeah.
you
I
could
didn't-
literally play the advanced games on your phone on the go. It's the same thing, and so
I will say with
They-
that, these other consoles are sort of transitioning into the mobility side. However, I will say Nintendo Switch, as of right now, does it better. Does it way better. I know that PlayStation started getting into it, but this is a prototype. It's so limited in its uses. It's really not very mobile. It's just okay. I can be standing up, walking instead of having to sit down.
All right. And then, Tony, at the very end right here, because these are great points, but when I think about greatest console of all time, I really think of one word. And if you can sum this word up to me in 60 seconds, it may make or break my vote, okay? The catalog. Explain to me the catalog.
The catalog. I mean, Nintendo has a pretty varied catalog. If you want RPGs, they got Xenoblade. They got freaking Dragon Quest. They got a lot of classic RPGs if you're into that. If you want platformers, they got Mario. They got Donkey Kong. They got freaking other stuff that I can't think of because I don't play platform. Kirby and the Forgotten Land's freaking awesome. That's basically an RPG. If you want freaking Metroidvanias, they got Metroid. They got they got, if you want adventure fantasy, they got Zelda. Whole bunch of freaking Zelda games. They're coming out with more freaking Zelda games. And Mario and Luigi's back. And they just remade Mario RPG and Paper Mario Thousand Year Door. If
Literally Mario and Luigi
play
the
those games
franchise
revamp.
back. Yeah, you're right.
So, I mean,
Okay, cool.
Nintendo has a pretty varied catalog, and they don't just make 20 million story-driven action samurai games. I don't know. What do you want from me?
Great. All right. That's beautiful. Beautiful wrap up there at the end. I love it. All right. Tony, we're gonna move on from you. I think you did the Switch justice, and that doesn't happen very often. So,
Thank you.
all right, next. All right, Kevin, hit us with your pick.
All right, this was a tough decision, but for me, just gonna get straight into it. The PS3, PlayStation 3. For me, I didn't grow up on it per se. Like I got the Xbox 360. Oh, I'm sorry, I had the PS2 to start with. But the PS3, like the evolution from the console before to the console of the PS3 is magnificent. I mean, even for Xbox, which Xbox 360 did amazing things. PlayStation 3 for me, the difference between the Xbox 360, because I know somebody's gonna put it out there. I get it. All right, but the PS3 for me blows it out with the multiplayer, free multiplayer. Like as a kid, I didn't really understand like how expensive multiplayer is. It wasn't even on my radar. I just either had it or didn't have it, and I had both. I had both the Xbox 360 and the PS3. And unless your parents were able to, I mean, as a kid, it might be different if you were an adult in this time. But as a kid, like if you didn't have your parents supplying with $13 a month or however much it was per month each month, like you just didn't have multiplayer. PlayStation 3 gave you free multiplayer, and for me, I think that's huge. I think that gives respect to the audience. Like, hey, we actually care about you. We're investing in you. We could be making big bank, and eventually they did go into that. But for a time, they didn't. And I think that brings you closer with Sony, and but to get away from that, games. I mean, they have countless all-time games. God of War, The Last of Us. Um, for me specifically, those were the main. Killzone 3. I don't really know the consensus on that, but for me, I just love it. I mean, it's a great action game. They had action. They had the story. They had the fun. Oh, there's a firework going off. But video games. It also looks amazing. I know that's a very unimportant part of the argument, but for me, it looks beautiful. It played beautiful. Very sleek. The menu screens were always very inviting with the instruments, and the feel was very slick and clean. Honestly, for me to change my mind, I would have to have you guys change it for me. I'm set. I'm sold.
Awesome, I love it. Great way to start that off. PS good with the catalog and the like you said, the design of it, and the multiplayer friendly aspects. I like it. So, all right, I'm so biased against this that I need someone else to go. I need someone to break this down. Jake James, break down the PS3.
I think there's a couple ways you could go about this, because many of you know I like the PlayStation 3. Originally I didn't get a PlayStation 3 at launch. I had an Xbox 360 before I got a PlayStation 3.
Yeah.
But here's the problem with the PlayStation 3, as good of a console as I feel it might be and such. I think it had a lot of problems throughout its lifetime. And I think it was also part of its success was dependent on the failures of other platforms, specifically 360. Not just with the Red Ring of Death. I think it also was dependent upon learning a lot of tough and very, very volatile lessons about online gaming with Xbox Live, and then eventually also trophy support, which is dependent on Xbox achievements, Xbox Live achievements. I think also one thing that I don't think you took into account, Kev, is that the PlayStation 3 was a real pain in the ass to actually develop for. That developers didn't really want to develop for the cell processor. I think it was called Cell Processor. I can't remember the specific name for the PlayStation 3, that they would have rather had been on the Xbox 360 or on PC or on the Nintendo Wii at the time back then. And that was coming from a lot of devs because it was so difficult to learn. And even though the games and the studios that did learn how to use the cell processor and actually develop games on that platform usually was like not smaller, but like there was a small amount of studios that did that. Like you obviously did get your Sony first parties, like your Naughty Dogs, like your Insomniacs, etc. But a lot of those studios and a lot of their games, I would argue, don't have the mass appeal compared to other games of that era. There was a lot of games going on at the time that were on 360, like Gears, like Halo, like Dead or Alive, like many other, again, you could go through lists, Dead Rising, like that were, some of them were probably also on the PlayStation 3, but they had a much more wider appeal on the Xbox 360. And a lot of it came from developing games for the PS3 for the cell processor, porting games over, because that was a pain in the butt. I remember developers, even back then when I was still starting my career, complaining about this, saying how much of a pain in the butt it was, complaining to Sony about this, like depending on Sony to actually make this happen. And even though I won't count this against the console, it still has to be mentioned, their online infrastructure was completely rocked during the PlayStation outage, which is something Xbox never had to deal with. Xbox had to deal with a entire different problem with their console at the time, which was something nobody could have really prepared for, or at least understood until it was actually people really knew what was happening, which is the Red Ring of Death. But I would argue that PlayStation, their online infrastructure was just so rocky that it opened the door for something like that to happen. If it was really the online component and the multiplayer component free or otherwise, was so integral to that experience. They needed to have a better infrastructure and a better handling of that, which they did not have for a majority of that time. It wasn't until the very end of PlayStation 3's lifespan that I feel like they really got a grasp on that. And again, that was all dependent on the success of Xbox Live and Xbox approach to online gaming, which, again, you could talk about that for hours. But it's a good console, but still not the best of all time for me.
What a great argument. And just to add a little bit to it, the Xbox and the Wii were actually outselling it for a very long time, and I believe it wasn't until 2013 that PS3 actually took Xbox 360 over in sales.
After the Red Ring of Death, that was the big
Yes.
thing, because when the Red Ring of Death happened, it really impacted the marketing and the perception of Xbox as a brand, because people were worried that if they were going to go buy a new console, it would be dead within a couple months, which is something that the other consoles didn't really have to deal with. That was such a big deal for them.
Which I will say, funny, fun little fact. I had the Red Ring of Death, and then my PlayStation actually got the Yellow Light of Death as well.
Yeah,
so
that
it
was a
had that
problem, but it wasn't as big.
very small
That's the
problem.
only
Yeah, it was a
thing.
very, very small problem compared to that Red Ring. And then I think the cell processor is one thing that really works against the PS3. As much as I love the PS3, it might be my favorite of all time. But in terms of greatest, I think that's a great point in terms of the actual development for the console. Yeah, so great point. All right, Alex, what do you think about the PS3 console? Any questions? Anything you want to throw at Kevin here?
Well, I'm seeing a pattern, and I'm a little on the leaning side of these are more personal. And as for greatest, you have to think right now, are people going to want to go and buy the PS3 or the PS5? Are they going to want to buy the next gen? Because the greatest would be better specs, better runtime, the loading time's a lot quicker. Let's say you can even play the previous games on the PS3 that are probably on some historic, I don't know. I don't really have a PS5, so I'm pretty sure they have the revamped version and all this other stuff, I remember Jake James said something about, the Red Ring of Death for Xbox 360, but I remember what is it? I don't want to call it a scandal, but the PS3, when that one hacker leaked everybody's personal information,
That was the outage.
that was a
the
big
PS3
that was
outage.
yeah that was huge, and I don't see that happening so far with the newer consoles that have better specs and run times and possibly the same games at better what do you call it, quality. So I don't know if I would consider it the best console if you're thinking about the best video game console, because that's more of like a really good staple in historical video game history. That would be a good, it's one of the better what do you call it, climbs of the evolution of gaming history. Yes, that's my opinion.
So Kevin, in response to that, how do you how would you defend the PS3 being, such a big historical, console, setting us a big precedent like that versus today being the greatest console of all time?
When you bring the word greatest into the equation, greatest is always going to come down to your experiences and your opinions. So it's at the end of the day, we're all like biased and our choice, because it's so each console has had a personal impact on us as gamers. So it's always going to be different. That's why we all got different choices, and I mean, this is so great to have Jake James up here because this gives us a completely different point of view. I mean, I was a kid, so I would consider myself a casual gamer. And my question to you, Jake James, would be, what made it a pain? And for me, or the majority of the buyers are casual gamers. So for me, I never even gave it a thought of the production for the PS3, which we the PS5 had problems with production and the lack of I forget the part that they were struggling with, but they had a shortage of a piece that they needed for the PS5. That's why they were so limited at launch. But for me, I mean, PS5 is probably the best console, strongest console that we have to date, and they kind of had the same problem. But that doesn't reflect that problem in production does not reflect in people's opinions on the console. So
Should I answer that, or should I answer that?
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So the main issue from, again, having followed the industry back then, you're like watching like a lot of the coverage from various places when devs were talking about this, not just on specials with like IGN, G4, etc., but also coming out in interviews in various places. The biggest issue from my understanding was learning how to actually develop games or program games for the cell processor. Where, as opposed to like the Xbox 360 at the time and even the Wii and other consoles before and after then, they were much more closer to the way that games are programmed and developed like on a PC. And it's easier to transfer those same skills and those same type of like visions that they had over to those other platforms, as opposed to bringing it to a PlayStation 3 with the cell processor. That's the way it was described by all these people that made those games at the time. Like, there was a number of games, I'm trying to remember a specific one, that took a while to bring it over to the PlayStation 3. And I think here's a perfect one. Skyrim. Skyrim is notorious for having such a huge problem as a port. As opposed to on the Xbox 360 and other consoles that came later on, because the game just did not run well. And I think Fallout was another one, because a lot of Bethesda games usually have similar problems. But like, those were games that were brought up at the time of why it was such a pain in the butt for devs to actually bring their games over to it, or at least it would take longer for them to deal with that.
So a quick follow-up question with that. Is it a pain in the fact that not only is it different, but was it stronger? I mean, PS3 is a stronger console than the Xbox. So was
It's
it
a pain.
painful because
No, I was gonna say, I didn't mean to interrupt.
yeah.
It's a pain. A pain, what I mean by that is that it costs more resources and it takes more time for them to actually bring it over there. For a lot of devs, the time it was much more easier and made much more sense to bring games to the other platforms, because again, you wouldn't have to spend time trying to learn that infrastructure or have the devs spend actually developing that version of whatever that game was for the PlayStation 3, as opposed to developing for one vision and then bringing it to all these other platforms.
I do like to make comparisons real quick, and the only thing I have to say is you're saying you like the PS3 and you're comparing it to the Xbox, which is, a different company's counterpart. And obviously there's evolutions down the line. So I was thinking of it like with war in a way. I know this is going really out there, right? So the first tank ever made, Little Willie, right? First tank ever made, that would be amazing. The first console, you could say, right? You're saying the PS3 is like the Tiger. Compared to the very first tank ever made, the Tiger was phenomenal. But you're also comparing the first tank ever made to maybe the first aircraft ever flown by, the Wright brothers or whatever. You're like, oh man, flight, it's a lot harder to make and all the specs. But that tank, man, it does not, it's basically like two mechanisms in war, two mechanisms in video game history, and then you go down the evolution and you're saying, oh man, this Tiger is better than Abrams because of, I was in that, that was just better at the time. The Tiger was just the better, and now the Abrams, even though it's there, it's not the greatest. If I were to go, which one would I choose in a war now with what we have and know now? I would go with an Abrams versus a Tiger, because I'm pretty sure I could easily wipe the Tiger off the face of the earth with its evolution. Or you could say, would you rather have, a stealth bomber versus an Abrams? You can, all that stuff, aircraft. I try to make comparisons. To me, what your argument is still, it takes more to make, yada yada, but we're still talking about, with technology today, the greatest in how it's functioning.
Right.
So that's interesting, because how does PS3 stand the test of time, and we're still talking about it? But also the 360. So Tony, I know you got thoughts. Wrap this up real quick. Give it back to Kevin, man.
Muted.
I forgot. Thank you. I'm gonna be honest. The PS3's been kind of a blind spot. You know, I had a 360, had a PS2, had an original Xbox, but like I never had a PS3. I didn't get one until recently, and like I haven't played a ton on it. But I will say that I don't know if this is necessarily a knock against the console, but it's maybe a knock against Sony. Like it's weird. Like a lot of the when I got a PS4, a lot of the definitive titles on there were just remastered PS3 games that were improved for the PS4. So it seems like the PS3 was like, here's, you know, the blueprint of this. And then later they were like, we know how to make this better. And then they put it on PS4. You know, I mean, that just has to do with time and whatever. But like to say that like the basic version of a game introduced on PS3 would be better than a better version in, you know, ways like running better graphical, all that on PS4. I don't know if I'd say that. I mean, and then do any of you remember the PS3 store?
Yeah,
it's an
PlayStation
abomination
Store back in the day. Yeah.
It's an abomination, dude. Having to on the PS4, you could just do. On the PS3, one letter at a time, baby. That is the most infuriating thing ever. I don't know why they thought that.
Everybody
sucks. It's terrible. That is maybe one of the worst interfaces I've ever seen. And then I don't know if other PS3s have had this problem. Maybe I'm sure Jake James could confirm or deny that. But my PS3 Slim has the internet connectivity of somebody with ADHD. It is the worst. It's like it'll connect and then disconnect. And then, like the freaking connectivity.
I still have a PS3 that works and it runs slower in comparison to PS4. And
yeah, so like it's not reliable. So I mean, I would say that is definitely like a knock against it if you're trying to play online. Obviously, that's not an issue with every PS3, but it seems, from what I've read about it when I was having that problem, it seems like that was kind of a common thing. And then with introducing blueprint version of their games, it would be improved. And then their terrible store interface, just awful. I think the PS3, in terms of like pioneering and introducing legendary games, yeah, I think you could say it's the greatest. But I mean, if there's these many things that are not optimal with it, I wouldn't say. I don't know if I could say I think it's the greatest console of all time. One of the greatest. Nah, I don't think so.
All right, Kevin, close it up. You can respond to that, but this is it. This is your time to really win us over right here.
All right. I'm gonna try to be as quick as possible, but there were a lot of points brought to me. I'll just go down the list. So Tony, the stores for old consoles, like they're outdated for everybody. Like Xbox 360, they're shutting down their store and they're doing this huge sale. We had these YouTubers saying like, oh, it's a pain trying to find video games, trying to find these discounts because they don't have on sale segment, which we're all accustomed to. So yeah, we're not arguing what is the best console, like the most powerful console, because that would just be the new ones. I mean, that's always how like if we do this video every generation, it's always going to be the new ones. And so that to me, that's just like a boring argument because the answer is right there. So we're talking about greatest. Like I said, it's always going to be about personal opinion, that nostalgia, and that generation, of whatever console that you're picking from. And for me, being around the bush, the PS3 console won the console war that year. Yeah, I've never watched a full. I mean, I watch football games all the time. I've never cared about the first half. The second half is what matters. The end score is what matters. And the PS3 at the end of when the clock ran out, PS3 won. It's not the PS3's fault that Xbox had malfunctioning devices. That shouldn't be a ding on them. Oh, they profited from. However, that is a true statement. Another true statement is saying it's not their fault. Like they don't control the Xbox. They don't produce Xbox 360s. But Xbox 360s, when they were produced, had a major problem. major malfunction, which we did not have the PS3. Honestly, I've never even heard of the yellow light with the PS3, and I've owned multiple PS3s. You know, my dad, he had the original release PS3, then we got the Slim, and now we have the God of War, uh, uh, the God of War Red edition, special edition. And so I played all three, and I've never had my console break down. Um, and then to go to Jake James, the production, I'm just not on that side of the field, so I can't argue or against it. However, I will say as a consumer, that's like just not my concern, and it never really will be. You know, it'll be my concern when it's a problem to me, like the PS5. Okay, well I couldn't really have a taste of the PS5 or even enjoy the PS5 because of the shortage. But even then, like that was COVID time, so you know everybody was suffering from that. So they kind of get, in my opinion, a free pass for that. But the PS3, I played multiplayer games on it. I mean, that's how I could only play multiplayer. The Xbox limited people. Like, when you're talking about a console, that is for everybody. But when you don't have the money to play multiplayer, okay, that limited. And I was, I experienced that. I had to lean on the PS3 for multiplayer because it was free. That's consumer friendly, where the Xbox wasn't.
You bring up some amazing points, and it's so funny, like this discussion, because my mind goes where Jake James went to. The cell processor, it's a mess. It hinders, development and game preservation and all this stuff. But at the same time, Kevin, you bring up such a valid argument that you really don't see online much, at least I don't, where if it doesn't affect the casual gamer or a large portion of consumers, then what does it matter? So I don't know.
I would argue against that, though, because it actually does. And it's a really specific way that it does, is that devs and companies, publishers don't put their games on it as easily, because of that. Specifically because of that reason. Because I would argue that if the cell processor was made, or if we didn't even have the cell processor, maybe if they had an infrastructure like an Xbox 360 or like the PlayStation 4 or whatever else, like if that was the case back then, you would have gotten more ports. You probably would have had more games developed on there. Probably would have been a radically different thing. That again, consumers would have more games available to them to buy, if not other types of games they'd be willing to try out and stuff. But again, that's a very specific reason because of that.
No, that's a good point. Yeah.
Real quick, so you brought up Skyrim, as part of the argument for one of the games where, if I'm remembering correctly, was difficult to port to the PS3.
Yeah, well, like it runs really bad. Like that's a notorious thing on the PS3 about Skyrim specifically, and Skyrim and Fallout.
Yeah, a lot of their games. A lot of
Bethesda games. Honestly, I'm surprised to hear that, because I had both the Xbox 360 and the PS3 edition. When my dad went on deployment, he took the PS3 with Skyrim. Well, we had just bought Skyrim, and the entire family was addicted to it. Like everybody was. And so he bought us an Xbox 360 with the Skyrim, along with it. And I played both editions, and I always preferred the PS3. I always preferred it because it ran better. It played smoother. There was less freezing. There was less bugs.
That's just objectively not true. That's a documented thing. Like the PS3 version of those games, and specifically Skyrim, had major issues. Like I remember reading the articles on IGN about it, and obviously later on, I'm pretty sure there was patches and stuff, but that was like a notoriously big thing, specifically for that game.
I don't know if it's subjectively not true because I didn't experience it. For me, it's a personal experience, and I literally could not have. I didn't have to read about it because I experienced it, right? Like I didn't have to go on IGN and read about all these problems because I had direct comparisons.
Now, what's funny is,
just personally,
Kevin, will that win you the argument? Maybe. I don't know.
Real quick. Oh, last point. I almost forgot. Sorry. Jake James, back on the PS3 benefited. PS3 was a turning point for the entire gaming industry. PS3 at the end of it put Xbox on it put this major boulder on them. It put immense pressure on them where they needed to come back with the Xbox One and win it right off the bat. And their launch games, terrible. and that set them back even further. And then PS3 set up success for the PS4. PS4 dominated. PS4 set up success for the PS5, dominating.
I would
So the
disagree with
PS3
that.
was a huge
I would
turning
disagree with
point
that.
against this console war.
I don't think
I
that
just-
had anything to do with PS3. I think that specifically for Microsoft had to do with the Red Ring of Death. That was such a big reason why there was a shift like that. Because again, the perception of what after the Red Ring of Death, when it became a huge problem, when it became a real problem like that, the perception of Xbox at that time and of that console was that people were just worried that they would spend the $400 or so and it would break down in such a short period of time. That's why they all went to go get PlayStation 3. And I know this because I did the same thing. Because originally I had an Xbox 360. Mine broke down on me 2 times for the Red Ring of Death.
Yep.
And there was a point where I was like, you know what? No, I just want to go get a PlayStation 3 so I could go play Final Fantasy 13 at the time, like that. But that specifically was that reason why that shift happened. That had nothing to do with PS3 specifically. PS3 was the aftermath or the cause and effect, or the effect from that cause there that happened like that. And that's why everything shifted and changed after that. And again, with the Xbox One, that was also the worry with them when that console was coming out, because it's like, oh, we're going to have another Red Ring of Death problem. And everything else, keep in mind, with Xbox One also had to do with the guy that went to Zynga. I think it was, oh my God, I can't remember his name, but he originally was at EA. He had the whole thing with sports, TV, and everything else. That was a part of their whole E3 conference. That it was more of an image problem for Microsoft as opposed to what PlayStation or PS4 at the time was doing. Why that
you can order
happened.
pizza from your Xbox One.
It was a lot of
Remember that?
different problems at the time that had nothing
Well,
really to do with Sony.
It was
I'm
huge
just glad
marketing
we
issues with
clarified
that.
that PS3 is peak consistency, which is, I mean, as a consumer, nothing more important than consistency. But I'm
That-
also glad that we've stated that we went from Xbox to my Xbox doesn't work. I need to go get a PS3, which shows that, again, consistency.
A lot of people did that. A lot
Yeah.
of people did that and went and got a Wii at the same time. Whatever their console was, they ended up getting a Nintendo platform. That happened for 2 generations.
That's true.
of consoles.
That's
Oh,
right.
we're gonna get it. Oh, we're gonna get into that. Trust me. But one thing I'll say, and I'll pass it to the next person. I had Sonic 06 on both the 360 and PS3, and it didn't work on either of them. So I have I have that little anecdote. So Kevin, you fought for your life right there. So we'll see. We'll see how it turns out for you. Next person we're gonna go to. Hopefully you're ready. I'm so interested to see the flip side of this coin. So Jake James, Lugo, let us know what the greatest console of all time is.
Okay, so I'm probably going to have a somewhat obvious but unorthodox reasoning for why my pick is this, because we keep talking about a lot of different things with all these consoles. I mean, we're talking about the greatest console. We're trying to argue. So for me, aspects of technology and limitations of technology, you know, they don't matter, and they kind of do matter in a sense. And they mattered to me in the sense where if they could be overcome and could reach and have a thing for the console that really resonates with people in a specific way, and that's mind share. Because when you think about gaming consoles and you think about gaming and stuff, usually there's like one of a few different brands or different types of consoles and pieces of tech that come to mind in the conversation all the time when it comes to that, right? You know, we could always rant and rave about the newest consoles and how powerful they are, how good the games look, the presentation, all this other stuff. But I would argue that there are still some games from back in the day that have more resonance than some of the newer games that get released now. I mean, there's a reason why Tetris is considered one of the greatest games of all time. Or Super Mario Brothers on the NES is considered one of the greatest games of all time. You know, stuff on the Famicom, like the original Legend of Zelda or Samus, you know, from Metroid, you know, stuff like that, or Metroid, the game in general. So for me, when I think of stuff like that, and I take into account also the necessity for the type of tech and the type of games and the type of stuff that was, you know, needed to be satiated at the time. And when I also think of the impact, not just at its specific era, but also down the line after it's long since gone, there's one console that comes to mind for me. And it's also a console that still sells a lot now these days, specifically in South America. So if you didn't already think about what I'm saying now, let me just tell you, it's the PlayStation 2. PlayStation 2 is the greatest console of all time for a number of reasons. And it's not a console that needed online. It's not a console that needed a lot of the kind of stuff that we kind of get a little bit spoiled with after it. But it is the console that influenced all those generations that came afterwards in a very different way than what the 16-bit era did. And from right before the PlayStation 1, even though we look back fondly on those consoles and we look back fondly on their libraries and what they mean to us with nostalgia, you know, growing up and stuff, PlayStation 2 is a very unique case that's very different from the console that came before or afterwards, because PlayStation 2 not only was a game console, but it was also a DVD device. And that was a thing that was really started to become a big thing back then, in that transition from out of the original beginnings of the 3D era, out of the 16-bit era into the modern era that we see now. A lot of people bought a PlayStation 2 console because, not just because it was a game device, because it could play DVDs and you were getting a multimedia stuff on it all in one place. There were a lot of things that came afterwards after that, with the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, and consoles afterwards, that took that idea of being a multimedia device and going beyond just games. That started really with PlayStation 2. Now, there were other consoles like the Dreamcast that did stuff like that, where you could do audio CDs, and you could do the same thing with PS2. The online component also was another thing that could be argued for some people. The problem was that PlayStation 2 not only outlasted all of them, but it also did it in a way that it may have not been as innovative or as like complex as some of those other consoles, but it still had a resonance with people. When people think of gaming now these days, if they're not old enough to have been in the 16-bit or the 8-bit era, like someone like me or anybody else that might be around my age or older, they're thinking of PlayStation 2, because not only of the library of games, which was so vast and diverse, that was ridiculous, more so I would even argue than the 16-bit era in many cases, but also a lot of those games also influenced the games and the eras that came afterwards. I mean, there's a reason why we look at Grand Theft Auto the way we do now, and it's because of Grand Theft Auto 3, which was a jump from 2D or over hot top 2D to 3D open worlds. That changed open world games forever. We look back fondly at games like Devil May Cry. We look back at Final Fantasy X, which was the first real 3D voice acted Final Fantasy game of that franchise that also changed, RPGs from that point afterwards, which Final Fantasy has a habit to do that with Square Enix. And also same thing with collaborations. Everybody remember Kingdom Hearts. We were talking about Kingdom Hearts briefly earlier. Okay. That really changed a lot of people's outlook when it came to collaborations between major companies. There's all of these different reasons that you could trace right back to the PlayStation 2 and its library of games. But I think also what makes PlayStation 2 uniquely different than every other console that's come out before or since then, or afterwards like that, is that it has really overcome not only its limitations in technology, but also the limitations of its era. Because like I said, there are people that still buy PlayStation 2s a lot in South America, like surprisingly so. It's one of those things that just makes no sense, but it's a thing, and it has to do with not only the poverty down there and also the easy access of new technology out compared to other regions. Like in North America, we get all the newest stuff. Europe gets all the newest stuff. Asia, Japan, Africa, you could even argue. But a lot of places in South America don't have easy access like that. But they do have access to PlayStation 2s, and they've had it for a very long time, to the point where it's literally, again, another luxury for people playing those library of games, resonating with people, making PlayStation 2, not just PlayStation and Sony, but PlayStation 2 specifically, something that's relevant. And again, I'll even draw a comparison now even closer to modern games and modern consoles on PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X and stuff. A lot of those games that you're seeing get re-released, a good chunk of them originated on PlayStation 2. Even on the Switch, you guys had Final Fantasy X and X 2 HD, which not only got ported to PlayStation 3 and other consoles like PSP or PS Vita and stuff, not PSP, PS Vita and stuff like that, but also got ported over to the Nintendo Switch. And look, even just recently at the Switch, the Nintendo Direct, we're getting a collection of Marvel vs. Capcom like that. A lot of people, besides playing in the arcades, a lot of people remember specifically the PlayStation 2 version of a lot of those games, and specifically Marvel vs. Capcom 2. But the list goes on. We've seen it with Devil May Cry. We've seen it with Street Fighter. We've seen it with, a variety of different games. The point is that a lot of those roots for a lot of different things, even though some of those games were ported over to various consoles, because let's be real, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, the best version is on Dreamcast. Marvel vs. Capcom, the best version is on Dreamcast. But a lot of people still went and bought and still had, or at least came into contact with the PlayStation 2 version of some of those games that got ported and stuff. A lot of those roots all go back to that console. A lot of the ideas and concepts and philosophies for the consoles that are made now these days could trace their roots back to the PlayStation 2, where a lot of those ideas really were conceptualized. And I feel like even now, whether you were an Xbox gamer or a Nintendo gamer back then, that PlayStation 2 was such a big part of the zeitgeist of that time and even relevant long afterwards, that it's very hard to find a lot of people now these days that don't know what a PlayStation 2 was, or at least have not come into contact with it in some way. So for me, even though there are still many significantly historical games on places like Super Nintendo or the Famicom or the N64 or the original PlayStation or the original Xbox, I feel like PlayStation 2 has such a significant and unique presence in the history of games before and afterwards that to me it's the greatest console for even more reasons that I didn't even get into that are just like so relevant and so important to a lot of how we understand games nowadays. Again, look at the library. Like I said, it's insane. Some of the games. I'm a Star Wars fan, and the majority of Star Wars games I played were on PlayStation 2. That eventually I got into later on. Some of them are even got ported soon or recently, like the Clone Wars game. It's on PlayStation 2, GameCube, and on Xbox, but that's the version that's getting ported over on PlayStation 5 right now on PSN. And I think also in other places at some point down the line. But even Bounty Hunter, same thing. That's another one that game got ported over. But the list goes on and on. You get the point. And I feel like that's the console for a lot of people. When they think of games, it's one of the first few consoles that comes to mind for them.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, it is the highest selling console of all time, and it's synonymous with so many IP and amazing games. So that's it, the PS2. So, all right, Tony, yeah. PS2, break it down.
Okay.
Listen, I know you're such a big Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy fan. You don't want to say anything bad about PS2. I already know it.
I mean, I'm going to come at it from an interesting angle. I'm going to play semantic because, to be honest, I don't really have anything bad to say about the PS2 in general.
I knew it.
I'm going to admit it. I can't, just be like, no, but actually, like, I don't, I can't think he said some really true things. However, I will say right off the bat, I know two titles in the Silent Hill franchise, that Shattered Memories and Origins. Shattered Memories was originally developed for the Wii, and then it was ported over to PS2. Silent Hill Origins was originally made for the PSP, and then it was ported over to the PS2. From what I've heard, the PS2 versions of those games are actually the worst versions. Like, as far as optimization, there's glitches, there's crashes. I mean, that's, like, the only thing I know, but it's weird that, like, two games made for inferior consoles, for some reason, had problems crossing over to PS2. And then, the PS2 has a lot of legendary games, but you can't experience any of them. There's no shortage of PS2 games that you can't even buy now that are just rare. I got this freaking list right here. Let's read some of them off. Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3 with the bonus disc. The Futurama game. Obscure. The collector's edition of Bully. Blood Will Tell. Silent Hill Shattered Memories, but that's with the whole franchise. Haunting Ground. Xenosaga. The freaking Xenosaga games. Rule of Rose. So, I don't know exactly what affects that, but, like, if you get, like, like other older consoles, yeah, they have some rare games, but it seems like a lot of the ones I've seen that you can't even get anymore are on PS2. They're essentially extinct. So, like, I feel like that kind of harms the PS2's legacy a bit, because it's like, sadly, like, a lot of those games just fell into obscurity. And then you mentioned Devil May Cry. Devil May Cry 3 came out originally for PS2, and it plays pretty well. Not, like, great, but pretty well. But have you played the original game even on the remastered version today? It plays like absolute ass. It just feels like it's a hack and slash game that feels like it has the movement of a survival horror game. So, I'd say, like, yeah, that launched a legendary franchise, but its flagship title, the one that started it all, is one of the most weird and awkward games, and then
I'm revoking your internet access privileges.
I would say that series really didn't hit its peak in terms of playability until 4, which was on PS3. That game, I played that game, and I'm like, so this is what it's supposed to feel like to play a Devil May Cry game. Oh my god. I mean, that's due to a few things, like when you play modern games and then you play something older, it's weird. And dude, Silent Hill 2 and 3, great games. Try playing them. Try actually playing those games. Freaking annoying. So, I mean, yeah, like the PS2's legendary. I'm reaching for the bottom of the barrel as far as things I could say. But, you know, a lot of those games are either not available or some of the legendary ones are a product of their time where when you actually go back and play them, they don't really feel that good. Like, yeah, they're great experiences, but as far as like playing those games, it's kind of mixed.
Very interesting angle. Yeah, you were right. No, but that's a good point. I'm Alex, I'm sure you have a slightly different angle to come at this with.
I mean, I just more like a broken record. You know, I look at it. You know, it was good in history. You know, so was the NES and some other things that made history, and people loved it. You know, back in the time, and you know all that stuff. But you know, still wouldn't call it the greatest. You know, just because I could play the games better on a new advanced console of that same style. I mean, it made its mark in history, and it's made its point. I loved the PS2 was one of my favorite. I got the PS2, and you know everybody knows Battlefield or Star Wars Battlefront Company. You know, I'm mixing up Star Wars Battlefront 2, and I played even some Bad Company and other stuff on there and stuff. I think, and it was one of my favorites. You know, besides playing some PS1 and some NES and stuff. It was amazing, but you know, when my son gets older, he's gonna be like, man, you know what the best console is? It's gonna be the PS7 or whatever. You know, it's not gonna be the PlayStation 2. No one's. It's a good staple in history. Like, do you go out and say, you know what? I want a Model T, not this Bugatti. You know, but you know, as you know, not many people are gonna want that. I mean, yeah, it's a great staple in history and everything, and I'm sure it's has its own perks and was great at the time, but like, still not what I would say the greatest of all time. You know, and we'll get to my thing eventually, but the console I chose is kind of like the greatest.
Okay.
You know, you can't. It's still here, and we're still using it. So I won't go into depth yet. So that's it.
All right. So keep those in the back of your head, Jake James, because we'll let Kevin go, and then you can just rebuttal and close out your arguments.
Okay.
Man, this is tough to argue, just for the fact
It
that
really is, yeah.
I didn't think about it, so I didn't think about an argument for it. Uh, it's
To your ancestor, what are you gonna say?
that is true. I don't want to talk anything
Yeah.
bad. I'm a big Sony guy, so this is tough. And I did grow up on a PlayStation 2. For me, it would have to be just for the fact that it's limited. So this is kind of like teetering on the line. So I'm trying to make it as clear as I can be on oh, well, my console is just more powerful than yours. I really don't want to go that direction, but it's limited
Yeah.
and facets like multiplayer. Um, for me, that's just something that without it, gaming wouldn't be as big as it is. So, PS2 was a very great in person. I remember growing up playing it at parties, sleepovers, everything. Like it is perfect for kids, the poverty like you brought up, which again is why like you're just so perfect for this. Like that knowledge that you have that maybe us we don't see or even think about. It's amazing to see. Um, for me, it would just have to be limited and outdated. Um, and the catalog, it is very everywhere. So like, I mean, if you just if you have a console, you're gonna find a game that you like and enjoy. And that was also like the movie, TV show, licensed games. Like that was peak. That was their peak era. But for me, the PS3 kind of has that too, and it's just the type of games that you're gonna find are just more have better depth than a PS2 game. Um, like I said, I didn't think of this one. I'm sorry. I really feel bad. I just would have never picked the PS2. So it is difficult to argue. Um, limited and outdated is just what I would have to say on the spot.
And there's there's not many. Yeah, it's a great pick. And there's one thing I could say that it would be going back to my first thing was the catalog. I think PS2 does have an amazing catalog, but if there was one thing that I think would maybe hinder it in the discussion of greatest console of all time would be maybe there might be a console out there with a better catalog. And that's just my only real argument towards the PS2 would be the looking back with maybe rose-tinted glasses at some of the titles. Not all of them. I mean, of course, there were some amazing titles, but I really think that the argument for the PS2 might be the catalog of games when looking at the discussion of greatest console of all time. That's really all I can say. So, all right, the floor is yours, Jake James. You can rebuttal, close it out, whatever you need to do.
Yeah.
Close it out.
So I guess like a rebuttal to each one of your guys' points or the points I brought up with Tony's point about the games, how some of them weren't playing as good on PlayStation 2 and stuff. I don't think that's a PS2 problem. That's a developer problem. That's a Konami problem because Silent Hill's Konami and stuff. I would argue also that going backwards for some of the games that were originally developed for PSP or any other platform, and then going back to PS2, again, that's a developer problem. That's not the PlayStation 2's problem. I think that because with those examples, you're going backwards in technology, and the developer at that point needs to be the one to make it work where you're a little bit more limited, or at least trying to make it easier and a little bit much more less complex for that particular platform, because those games are still decent for what they are. And I think that some of those games, I think it was Silent Hill 2 and 3, I think it was what you said, or some of the other games that you have mentioned, and forward in other consoles and other platforms, they were still pretty much very similar to that original vision and then just put on other platforms like that. But again, I think it goes back to being a developer and a development problem rather than an actual hardware or a console problem itself. The other thing too, with the point that you guys made about the library of games and the catalog, the thing is that when I say catalog and I say really great catalog of games, I not only not just talking about the quality of those games at that particular point in time in that era, I'm also talking about, the idea of people wanting to go back to them, and the idea of people wanting to at least go back to them either to re-release or to go back and play or to take elements of those games from that era and then bring it forward. The reason why I bring up Devil May Cry 3, on PlayStation 2 is because a lot of what was dependent on Devil May Cry 5 and other entries of the series go back to specifically that game. And for Final Fantasy, same thing also. A lot of Final Fantasy games, their presentation are upgraded, with voice acting, with beautiful visuals, with all these other things, because they get that same type of thing that works with Final Fantasy X on PlayStation 2. Final Fantasy X was a launch game, or around the time of launch, I should say, for PlayStation 2. The Bouncer was a launch game on the PlayStation 2, or around launch time, I should say, like as close as you could possibly get to it. Like that. And that was the same type of thing that was kind of like established for Square Enix games and eventually Square Enix RPGs and stuff. I think also the idea of being limited and stuff, again, you have to really kind of think about and establish what does limited mean, because you could say that same thing about the Super Nintendo, which has arguably some of the most iconic games around. Same thing with the NES, even the Atari 2600, which is inferior technology to consoles that came later. But like, look at the resonance that some of those games have. Like Atari 2600, the very first Star Wars game was The Empire Strikes Back, which is influenced by Defender, which is another super primitive game, but just has such a resonance and such a relevance to a lot of things that came much more afterwards. And I still maintain the fact that the idea of being a console that's a multimedia console, a piece of tech that does more than just play games, is really the genesis of that idea with PlayStation 2 that you would not get in the subsequent consoles afterwards. You wouldn't get the same idea with PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 afterwards, or even Xbox for that matter, because Xbox came after PlayStation 2, where it was trying to one up the same ideas that was being done with the PlayStation 2 at that time, where I think, again, because it was PlayStation 2, Nintendo 64 or GameCube, Xbox, and then Dreamcast around the time. Because again, the timing with everything gets a little bit muddy, because Dreamcast have ended up dropping at one point, where some of those consoles, wanted to really take that idea of being able to play DVDs or audio discs and really implement it to them and be like, hey, we got this too. Hey, we got this also here, and we got our own types of games and stuff like that. But again, it really goes back to that console, which is really the genesis of that idea, but also a relevant idea that percolated throughout the years and stuff. So again, it's hard to say a console's limited when you have things like that where some of these consoles, some of these games really have a resonance throughout the ages, again, beyond their initial release and beyond their initial limitations of technology.
Let me, do you mind if I ask a really quick question?
Yeah.
So for all the PS2 titles that have been since ported over to other consoles, aside from obviously people who had the original versions on PS2 from way back before they got ports, is there any would you say there'd be any people that would be I want to play this legendary PS2 game instead of playing the modern remasters, I'm going to buy a PlayStation 2 and buy the original version? Would you see any reason aside from just the novelty aspect, if you're a collector or something like that, for somebody to want to play those original versions on the PS2?
I think there's some people out there, and there's definitely a number of people that are around that probably feel like that. They're probably not always the same as YouTubers or people on social media that are like that, or even collectors for that matter. Some people just have nostalgia that they have from other family members. But I think also the willingness of companies and publishers to want to port those games, knowing that there's interest in those games that might be limited because of the unavailability for some people to not get a PS2, or the will to go out and try to find a working PlayStation 2 for whatever reason, because there's plenty of PlayStation 2s out there. Again, they get sold in places like South America a lot, surprisingly a lot more than anybody realizes. But it's the idea of those games and the relevance of those games in certain people's lives that generates that interest. Outside, forgetting about YouTubers, because I think that YouTube and the retro gaming content creation and market for collecting really shifted a lot of things in the zeitgeist for people, especially nowadays that YouTube has become such a big thing. Because again, I would argue that what really impacted that was places like AVGN, Angry Video Game Nerd, and Screw Attack, that really took the idea of going back to some of these older games of the past, that really kind of brought that back into the public consciousness and stuff. But I think the fact that some of those games and series and different types of releases get re-released on these modern platforms, in collections, or just availability through the online digital store, even in some cases through places like Steam, which is PC of all places, some games getting ported over to there like that. There's definitely people that feel that way in just various different capacities. They're not always the ones that are going to want to go buy the console, the original hardware, to play it though. But the point is, they're still thinking about those PlayStation 2 releases.
That's a great point.
For me, to kind of rebuttal, now that I've actually had a little bit of time to think, is I just feel like what you're saying about with all these game catalogs and accessibility really can kind of go for the other consoles in that generation, like the Xbox, like the GameCube. GameCube, I remember going from Star Wars to the Animal Crossing, to then you had horror games up there, so you had Luigi, and then I want to say Resident Evil 4 was on the GameCube. So diversity with the PS2, that was sort of just that era for gaming as a whole. GameCube got a benefit from that. Xbox got a benefit from that. And then to get a little bit more specific, exclusives, for me, Xbox would have to win that. Xbox would have to win that with how big Halo and Far Cry were. I mean, honestly, I'm struggling trying to think of PS2 exclusives.
Love the effort, bro.
I mean, I'm just flat out say I disagree with that, because There are exclusives on all the platforms there. You know, again, Xbox had some of their big series. Xbox had things like Halo, Dead or Alive. You know, they even had Jet Set Radio at one point with Jet Set Radio Future and stuff, which was originally on Dreamcast, or the series was on Dreamcast. I mean, but if you're gonna go for as far as the number of exclusives, there were a lot more games that were just on PlayStation 2 that were not anywhere else, and a lot of them. And it comes down to the reason that every developer, every publisher wanted to be on PlayStation 2. They definitely had games everywhere within that era, but I know specifically because of the install base of the console, because of it having a DVD player and having the ability to do that before a lot of these others did, every developer wanted to make a game for PlayStation 2. That's just the way it was. It has such a wide and diverse library, diversity being the types of genres and the style and type of games that were available, much more so than the other platforms at the time. It was that wild for people to put games on there and they knowing that they were going to make money.
What games?
Again, you had exclusive Resident Evil games on there. There was the Resident Evil Outbreak. You had Resident Evil Code Veronica X. You had the Devil May Cry games, which were not on anywhere else. You had, again, the Star Wars games that were exclusive there, like Racer's Revenge. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I'm trying to really go into deep things. Again, the Bouncer, Final Fantasy X, you know, Kingdom Hearts, huge one. The fighting games, like some of them were exclusively for a time until later on they got
Marvel vs. Capcom 2.
Marvel's got, but also Capcom versus SNK, the Street Fighter collections, you know, both the Alpha and the original Street Fighter collection. Soul Calibur, again, a lot of different things. Because Soul Calibur 3 wasn't on the other platforms. It was only on PlayStation 2 at the time. You know, but the point is, like, there are games like that you would have to really go and just look at the library that are there, but there's an abundance of them that you'll find. Again, even though I'm not thinking of all of them right now, and as much as the other platforms had their exclusives, I still maintain that developers wanted to put their games on PlayStation 2 more often and more frequently than they did on the other platforms, and that's why you got so many of them.
I think the PS2, it's a really good choice to argue, but I just don't think most people would ever pick it. And exclusives, I think GameCube had just as great exclusives on their own right as the PS2, and I think the PS2 had just as great as exclusive as the Xbox. I mean, like I said, everyone was peak with the diversity in the games that they had, and they also had great exclusives like Halo for the Xbox, like Mario and Animal Crossing for GameCube. Like, those aren't just throwaways. Those are, you know, they're still making them 20 years later. Today, they're still making them. Like, they're lasting. You know, they aren't specific to that area. Like, they didn't just end. They're continuing. Whereas some of your games have transitioned over to these other consoles already.
Yeah, but there are games that are like that, though. I mean, look at God of War. I mean, that's a big one that's still going on now. Devil May Cry, you know. And again, it's you could go to each individual franchise. You could go to
Ratchet and Clank
series. You know, there's ones that are out there, but the point is that a lot of that stuff still stems back to that console for one reason or another. There's multiple things that you can't say that about a lot of the other consoles in various different ways. I just think that as far as mind share, as far as relevance, as far as overall just impact in general, that PlayStation 2 to me has the largest one, or at least the one that's the most potent for it.
Great rebuttal to that. And Kevin, great question, because like I said, I think the catalog is where you want to dive in for the PS2, but great job talking about it, defending it, and making your argument, Jake James. Is it enough? We'll find out. All right, Alex, you're next. And I'm glad I made this no rules, because good luck.
So I'm going to start off before I read what I actually wrote down and sent in to Caleb. First off, you know, we've talked about all this, you know, it's expensive. Is it, you know, for the consumer? Are people able to buy it? You know, nostalgia, all this other stuff. Well, I just wanted to say, you know, I do like to do comparisons, you know. It could be cheap, you know, and then at the same time, it can not be cheap and still be really good, but that doesn't mean people liked it as much or something like that. You know, for instance, you know, I my comparison would be, you know, it might be cheap. Like apparently the Thunderbolt 2 military aircraft is $18 million, right? That's the cheapest aircraft jet that we have. Now, cheap doesn't mean it's the best, right? You could be top speed, the MiG 25 Foxbait, top speed according to this website that I'm using. Best technology, F-22 Raptor. Most expensive, F-35 Lightning. You could be anyone who has the money. If you put it down, you could get all these things, but none of them compare with how they do as the console. And so I say that the one that they say is the best air combat, has 100% good, is the F-15 Eagle. Apparently, you can have the most expensive, best technology, top speed. You could have even, let's talk about console, best rates of processing and all this other stuff. But if it doesn't do its job and last, I would say, then it's not a good console. So I'm gonna get sidetracked from there. I'm gonna get into my thing real quick here. So he asked me, what is the best video game console? I'm not talking about nothing to do with games. I'm not talking about we're talking about consoles here. I could care less about the games. They can bounce from one to another, okay? I could see the same game on Xbox as PS3 sometimes. Who cares if it's exclusive? Because even exclusives came to this console later in life. So I looked up the definition of console, right? A combination of displays and input device which with an operator can monitor and interact with the system. That's basically the definition of a console. So I would have to say the best video game console would be, in my opinion, the Valve Index display and controls with a spec'd up PC. Now you might be like, "Oh, that's not a console."
On definition alone, that should be disqualified from the conversation.
You know what? The definition made it that. So I would say, I'll just read my thing because I'll get off track. If you just think Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, or handhelds, you're a bit behind. All those consoles were made from the coding and programming of a superior console known as the general computer, from my knowledge. Even a VR system has to be wrote from a computer, as Mother PC writes all the data via the operator. Now, I said a VR display because now instead of a 2D display trying to emulate a 3D world, though with modern equipment, we are able to make a 2D eye experience more of a personal experience. Not to mention that running off a computer, you can get increase in its functionality and get more modern equipment installed. So I could have this. The PC has been mama console and is still here. And look, which console are you using this time? I know you're not gaming right now, but which video game console, because this is considered a video game console, are you using this moment right now that you're on right now? Okay, not to mention, you might say, "Oh man, Nintendo games are yada yada yada." I heard most of the streams I've seen are emulated Nintendo games. Okay, so that means Mama PC handles those games. Yes, they may not be portable, but you did make a point that you could technically take a laptop with you, and if it's a gaming laptop, it's portable then. That's not too bad. And then, you could say, yada, yada, PS2, PS3, and then we have the new one. You see, I don't need to talk about PC1, PC2, because PC extends, all right? And if you get the modern specs, it is the best, okay? When they show you the release of a game, it's not on the console of PS2, Xbox, or whatever. It's on a PC because it can handle the graphics and intensity to actually draw you in to buy it at a lower graphics and lower quantity. You see, I've seen a lot of people go to the E3, like, wow, look at that, look at the graphics on that, I'm so hyped for that. When they get it, it's dumbed down because that console nowadays can't handle the high intensity performance that Mama PC spec'd up can handle. Now, we're looking at a screen right now. That's dope, right? It's nice. It's pretty. I'm sure you can get OLED, high definition, 400,000K. I don't care, But how are you going to get even more immersed in your video games? Virtual reality. Until they invent, like anime or whatever, a full dive system where your whole body just gets lumped into a spiritual awakening into a system. that's the closest you're going to get to the closest. If I can play Skyrim no longer on a screen, but I can be like looking around and I can technically feel like I'm grabbing. That's even more of a personal experience than you could ever do. Now, I didn't include that new walking thing where people walk in place because I don't want to do no exercise. I'm here to play video games, not to freaking sweat and be all sweaty while playing freaking Call of Duty or something. All right, we're not hearing about that. We're looking at the greatest. So all your games, all your consoles that you've created, they were decoded from Mama Console Video Game PC. So, I'm pretty sure all those exclusive games you can still play on PC. I have the new Kingdom Hearts series on PC. It's no longer exclusive, and I'm pretty sure I could play Horizon Zero Dawn. I could play Halo on my PC. I don't need to have an Xbox. And you know what? I don't even have to pay for using the internet subscription. I just pay for internet. You have to pay for internet and to use the internet. So I don't quite understand. But so, in all reality, PC would be the PC is the greater, and I rest my case there.
All right,
so
let me just jump in real quick because there's no rules, and I think this actually does bring up a very interesting argument about what is a console, because we know what a video game console is, but everything, like you're saying, for a console is developed by
Mama PC.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting, maybe philosophical argument to this question, but I mean, great. All I'm going to say is great effort. I love it. So I don't even know where to begin. Jake James, you should have seen your reaction to this. Everyone had this reaction. It was amazing. So where do you begin with this?
So let me put it this way. I think there needs to be a schooling on the definition and the differences between a console, a platform, and a technology. Okay, because as someone,
I did specify the definition.
As someone, okay, because the problem is going on Google and looking for a definition of a console like that is not going to help this whole conversation, right? Because as someone that has been gaming for a very long time, I've played and used PCs all the way back to old IBM computers. I believe they were Macintosh 2 or something like that, but it's old IBM computers from back in the days, like the early 90s and stuff. The main thing is that when we talk about consoles, both in the modern era and in back in the day, all the way back to like the Atari 2600 and stuff, we're talking about consoles and technology that's fixed within a specific unit. We're not talking about platforms, which is what PC, mobile gaming, and like mobile devices are. Those are platforms. We could even say that a console is technically a platform, but when we talk about it in that sense, we're not talking about one specific console. We're talking about consoles, meaning that fixed technology where gaming and other experiences are available like that. PC is a platform where it's not, again, it's an ever-evolving technology. PC is a technology where it's constantly changing and implemented it over the years and stuff. But when we talk about greatest consoles, when we mention what consoles are, we're talking about a fixed unit and fixed technology within those parameters like that. So on the basis of the definition being so loosely thrown around, I totally disagree, because PC is not a console like that, despite what the definition you read was. When we're talking about consoles and when we're looking at consoles and how we've always discussed consoles growing up like that, we're talking about those specific console generations that have that fixed series of guts and units and tech in there and what we play on them and the types of experiences we get on them. So and by that,
the question was the greatest game console of all time.
If you open up to that, when you start to look at it like that, you have to talk about mobile devices, because then it makes all of our arguments obsolete, and it's just not a right thing, because mobile is that same type of technology we've had for the past since 1980 something, 1970 something, we're going well over 50 plus years, all the way in the palm of our hand, and something like this, like that. And it makes the entire discussion obsolete. But again, when we talk about consoles, we talk about those fixed types of consoles, that it's stuff that's not a platform. It's a very semantic heavy issue, but again, you have to understand, you have to really define what you're talking about at that point. So,
okay. And I want to add to that too, because that was great. You got to have the correct definition, that's why I said from the top, I think it's an interesting argument over the definition. So there's home video game consoles, handheld game consoles, hybrid video game consoles, micro consoles, and then plug and play / retro consoles. So in your argument, I think personally the most interesting part of it was when you started talking about the Valve Index, even though that is a peripheral to a game console. There are VR units that do have chips in them themselves that can stand alone and play games. So I think that's actually an interesting argument, but that's a different argument. But anyways, I love it. Go ahead if you have any rebuttal towards that.
I mean, I just did the definition of console itself. I included video game because we could just
I love it.
interpret that as that's what you're doing on said console. It's just an adjective. So I did console. That's what I came up with as the best answer because I think about when you're playing video games, they tell you to hack a console. I'm not. They don't tell you to on the video game if you're gonna hack a console. They don't tell you to hack the Xbox or hack the PS. No, they tell you to hack this system. And the system that we're talking about here would be the PC because even though yes, it was born back in before the modern video game systems, not consoles. Well, you could say consoles obviously, but systems. Now it's evolved. Now I can't take the PS2, I can't take the PS3, and I can't take the Switch, and I can't take out things and make it better. I don't know if that's just a limitation or if that's just how it's made and you just remember it in history for the rest of the time till you get the PS3, PS4, or the Switch 2, to make it the greatest of all time. But the PC has always been the greatest and is what we continue using and what we are using as is. And that's all I have to say. I mean, I can't rebuttal it anymore. I don't know how to, I would say.
You did an amazing job arguing. All right, Tony, give us your thoughts on this. And then Kevin.
I don't even know where to begin. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to just make before we even talk about anything relating to video games, I'm just going to make a practical argument. If you're only playing games on your PC, do you know what can happen to PCs? You can get viruses, you can get hacked, all this stuff happens. If that happens and that's the only thing you play games on, guess what? You ain't playing no games and you got to pay money to get that fixed.
There was just a huge outage today, or yesterday.
My PS5 can't get hacked. My Xbox One can't get hacked.
That
my PS2, my PS3 can't get hacked. And
that PS3 did actually.
Wow.
I can't play games because somebody hacked into my video game console. And then you saying that,
my driver's unupdated.
Yep, everything in consoles, everything in video game consoles we have is just how do you say it? It's a derivative facsimile of technology. Yeah,
that's what it
is. But dude, the first games ever were on PC. Those old adventure games? No, hold on. You know what it was? A black screen with white text, and you put in commands, and you couldn't see anything.
We wouldn't be here without that.
Stuff like NES came out.
The first game. The first NES. The first game was actually, because Ralph Baer talked about this, the first
Tennis for Two.
Was actually catch the ball or catch the dot. It was done on military devices.
Yeah.
It was like a laser. Yeah. So guess what? We had those primitive games that were just text. And then video game consoles came and were like, hey, let's do that, but put a picture to it. So they improved on what a PC did. That was a PC
Wait.
console.
There was a picture. That's how you watch the two things move back and forth.
No, I'm talking about those old text adventure games. Look them up. It was only text. It was just text.
Okay.
That's the thing. Right. Look it up. Text adventure games.
No monitor then.
Yeah, but it was really like the Commodore 64, the Intellivision, stuff like that. It was a lot of early games were just text. There were no images. And then I found this Reddit thread. 2023, the year of bad PC ports. Let's take a gander at this. Dead Space remake, traversal stutters, DLSS worsening texture quality, certain settings giving massive stutter, RE4 remake, ray tracing issues, Hogwarts Legacy, spotty performance, Redfall, spotty performance, The Last of Us Part 1, bad performance, Jedi Survivor, very bad performance, City Skylines 2, very bad performance, Metal Gear Solid Master Collection, locked resolution, no remappable controls, issues with FPS limit, forced linear filtering. So, 2023 was the year where I kept hearing about these PC ports of games that came out. And the PC port was the worst one. How is that possible? That's all I gotta say. If the PC is so good, how did games launch on the superior master race and run worse than the console versions that are apparently just the worst version of a PC? How did that happen? I don't know. Optimization? Who knows? I don't know.
Greatest console of all time, iPhone 13. All right, Kevin, what's your?
Wait, can I speak for everybody? That was everybody's reaction, right? I just feel stupid, man. Like I didn't take into account my fridge or my Tesla into the equation of a console. My fridge can play
But
games.
in video games,
Can it play
Oh,
Doom?
your fridge can.
Can it
Oh,
play
that's
Doom?
true. That's that. See.
I thought I missed bad with the PS2. This brings on like a whole other category. But for what I will say is this is a very philosophical question. But let's just say like if you were arguing for PC, I'm trying to be so nice. It was a terrible argument. Like even if we did all end up mutually agreeing that the PC was a video game console, which it isn't, it was a weak argument. I feel really bad when you're having to use the question as a point. Well, it's just the greatest. It's the greatest. That's where it kind of becomes like a weak argument. And also the console thing, like to answer the philosophical question, was the device made to play games? It wasn't. It was made to connect people around the world. For messaging, for interaction. It was mainly in the beginning used for social media. I mean, like.
But before any console, it was the original game maker.
I love it.
It's such a bizarre. That is a bizarre.
Yo, he froze. I don't know if he froze for you. That's awesome.
I'm speechless. That's a fair point. But yeah.
All right. So what I need you to do.
Yeah.
We're all speechless, and why? Alex, I need you to just close out your argument on why it is the greatest console of all time.
I grew up, and I had the NES, and then Nintendo 64. Went to PS1, PS2. PS2 was one of the most shocking ones for me, was because of you had Star Wars Battlefront 2. I played that religiously. It was one of the best, the coolest thing. That and a Tom Clancy game in there. I was like, wow, this is super cool. I played with my sister all the time, and I would say it was awesome. But as time progressed, you were like, wow, look at these new things coming up. And then there was the Xbox 360. It was my next one. I loved it. Call of Duty, played it online and stuff. PS3 was actually before Xbox 360, it was PS3, because it was free to play online. I never played online in my life. I was like, yo, this is so cool, right? There was all this, I went to Xbox 360, played Halo, met my best friends, made really awesome connections, played online forever. I was like, okay, now I started playing Destiny. It was one of my big things. I really got into Destiny. And then my cousin came over and showed me on the PS4 the graphics on it, and I was like, wow, this is awesome. And not only that, but I could play in a party and share my screen, and they can control my controller on that. I was like, yo, that's dope. That's better than the Xbox 360. They can't do none of that on the Xbox 360. They went from that, and then PS4, once I did that, I was like, I just keep buying the next version of a console. It's tiring. $500 for this, $500 for that. Any add-ons is added on, and I have to pay for internet times 2 again. Like, what's up with this? This is kind of annoying, I was like, if I get a PC, all my games are there. If I need to upgrade it to actually function, I just take it and get the next component and put it in. I got the PC and I've never gone back. I can do everything. I can do more than any of the consoles. You know, I can connect with you guys. I can Discord. I can talk. I can play Xbox games. I can play PlayStation games. I can do it. You know, it all and more. And then one of the greatest things was when I first got my first Oculus. It was like a whole new experience of playing games where I was almost like there in the game. Instead of just looking at a screen, I was in the game. And to me, that was like, wow. But the thing is, the first Oculus couldn't handle it. So I had to hook it up to my PC, and the PC was able to handle the specs. And it made it even more visually appealing to me. And I was like, that is awesome. Like, I could see better quality of graphics. To me, growing up is the greatest thing is better games. What better games, better gaming. That's what we're here for. PC can't handle it. You just got to upgrade it. I don't have to buy a brand new PC unless it dies. But, you know, if you take care of it, just like I had the Xbox 360 and it never turned red. I had that for like 4 years almost. Come on. Just take care of your stuff. Let it cool down on the Xbox main screen, was what I was told. That way you don't have the red rings of death. You know, take care of your stuff. You know, it'll last longer. And if it doesn't, you just got to suck it up. But you know what? I don't have to buy another console. I can upgrade it to do it. I could run the game on lower graphics. Yeah, it may suck, but I can still play the game. I can still play with my friends. I don't have to buy a new console to play with my friends or anything because they decided to go to PS5 or, you know, from Xbox One S, whatever the heck Xbox is doing. You know, that's my reasoning. The greatest console is something that I can get more immersed in, enjoy more in depthly, which would be the VR, and something that can handle multiple games. I could play Switch games on here if I get an emulator. Me and Caleb, I'm pretty sure we played Pokemon and we did a randomizer. That's what a lot of people do. You know, you can't do a randomizer on the Switch. You know, I can't play Brilliant Diamond randomized on the Switch. They won't allow that unless you break it and modify it. You know, I can modify things on my PC easily. It's pretty simple. You can't modify other games unless they allow it, you know, and even then it's limited. So I don't quite understand.
I think,
to me, this is great.
Yeah, I think you're actually making a good argument for a PC over a console. Like, that's the argument. And what's funny is I'm not sure about Jake James's console. You know, what you play most of. I know for me, I play a mixture of everything, literally everything. Kevin, I believe you play a little bit more PlayStation. Tony, you play a little bit more Nintendo. And Alex, you play a lot of PC. So it's like we're getting different perspectives here. So I think that's just an interesting argument. Will it be, you know, the greatest console ever? You know, I'm not gonna answer it, but I mean, you made the argument. You made the argument.
Can I have one more thing?
Real quick. Then I'm gonna close it. I'm gonna close it out.
I think the real question is the PS5 the greatest PC? Because on the console you can access the internet.
You, dude. I hate you.
Like
they just added Discord. Like, you can get on Discord. You can get on Netflix.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So really, PC is starting to get outdated.
Okay, so
catching up.
Great. Okay, that's a great point because transitioning into my topic, I want to talk about that because, you know, I thought about it. Greatest console of all time. It got to have all the features, right? It got to have everything. Got to have the internet. Got to have, you know, Netflix. It got to be able to do Discord. It got to run all the best games at the highest graphics, whatever that makes the best console. Absolutely not. That is not what makes the best console. Okay. I'm going to tell you guys what the best console is of all time because I went and I looked at every console. Okay. And then I thought about everything that made the console, you know, bad and brought it down. And then I found this one console where it did something that I don't think any other console has done. And that's what I'm here to argue. Okay. I never thought I would be arguing for this console ever in my life, but the greatest console of all time. All right. The Nintendo Wii.
I was thinking it.
Here's why. Okay. Ready? A few reasons. First thing I just want to say is, because I love gaming, the game catalog. Backwards compatibility is a huge thing. You guys didn't really talk about it. Okay. What has one of the greatest catalogs ever? GameCube. What can you do? You can play those on the Wii. Okay. You can put in the memory card. You can plug in the Wavebirds. It's a wrap. Okay. Next thing, if you want to talk about the Nintendo Wii itself, it didn't just have a peripheral that was motion controls. It was the actual console. It launched with it, and then it inspired Kinect and PlayStation Move, which failed. But the reason it succeeded on the Wii, although it did get annoying after a certain point in time, it succeeded on the Wii because the Wii did something I don't think any other console or PC can do, or phones or anything. The Wii literally brought together gamers. It had online functionality, but also in local play. And not just through LAN, even though I believe it did have those capabilities, because I know the Xbox and PS2 had LAN capabilities, and they brought people together. And then you want to talk about multiplayer gaming in the modern era with PS5 and whatnot. But this brought people together. How many people do you know that still has a Wii set up to play Wii Sports? Okay. When we're talking about the greatest console of all time, you can have so much fun just gaming on this console. All right. It has some of the greatest games of all time. You got Mario Galaxy. You got so many different Legend of Zelda games that you can play on here if you consider GameCube and Wii. You got the Metroid Prime games. And I'm not even the biggest fan of all the Nintendo games, but what else does it have? It has fun peripherals, okay? Rock Band. I know you guys love playing Rock Band. Can you do that nowadays? Not really. I mean, you can do a little bit, but the Wii was that system, okay? It had Resident Evil 4, so it had those type of games. It had the Virtual Console. The biggest issue people have with the Virtual Console on the Wii is that it didn't transfer to the next system. But if we're talking about you just have a Wii with you, you have the Virtual Console where you can play games from all the previous systems, backwards compatible with the GameCube. The motion controls are actually really good. It enhanced sports games. It enhanced games where maybe you had a sword. It enhanced games like Rock Band where maybe you could play instruments. It had so many, a diverse catalog of games. And if you got tired of the motion controls, you could just plug a controller in. You could use a controller. I love the Wii Pro controller. I use that for everything, especially playing Smash Bros. Brawl back in the day, which was another game that brought people together to have fun playing on the console. So I think Nintendo Wii, greatest console of all time, because it did what a video game console needs to do, and that is bring people together to play games, and it did it better than any other console. I rest my case. Never thought I would be arguing for the Wii, but here we are, and I can defend it. So who wants to go take a crack at the Wii?
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I freaking love the Wii. I played the heck out of that when I was younger, and even I've recently played Silent Hill Shattered Memories on the Wii, which was the original version, and like playing, like, it's not really a survival horror game like the others. It went in an interesting direction. It's more of like a adventure point and click game with horror elements, but like playing that kind of game with motion controls and interacting with stuff was absolutely transcendent. But my problems with the Wii, one, it's like I said with the PS2. Look up any of some of these older Wii games and even some of the older GameCube games that were ported over the Wii. Like, whether you want to get the Metroid Prime games for GameCube or Wii, they're freaking expensive. Like, there are so many of those games that are just lost to time. So much so, Paper Mario Thousand Year Door was so expensive for so long that they remade it for Switch, and now it's cheaper. Like,
they remade it for Switch at a lower frame rate. You could play it on the Nintendo Wii at a higher frame rate.
I mean, I would argue that the lower frame rate isn't as bad as spending a lot of money. And then
all right.
The Wii, playing third-party games on the Wii kind of blows. Have you played Spider-Man 3 on the Wii? It's an abomination. Literally. It made me sick. I was sick for 3 weeks. And then freaking you saying it like brought people together. It does what a video game console should. Well, that's why I picked the Switch, because like Switch does a lot of that. And you could say, I think I've heard like the gyro aiming with the Joy-Cons isn't as good as the Wii motion controls. I don't know how true that is. I haven't played much with the Switch. I've mainly played motion controls with the Wiimote. But I would argue that, I mean, a lot of Wii games were just ported over to Switch and made better. The Switch is a more powerful console. It's basically like a Wii 2.0. So, I mean, yeah, like the Wii's cool. It jump-started a lot of stuff. I freaking love it. But I would argue that for the most part, you could play those games and even better, like Smash Ultimate is obviously the best version of Smash in a lot of respects in terms of like how it plays and performance and everything. And you could play them on the Switch, and you can't take your Wii with you to work and play it on your lunch break or play it on the bus or play it at the airport. Get out of my face.
Here's what you can do. You can invite your coworkers over after because they probably have a Wii and they can bring their Wiimotes and pair them. And what's funny is you're talking about price. The Wii actually launched at $250, which is cheaper than the Switch launched in 2017.
I didn't mean the price of the console. I mean the price of buying those rare games.
I rest my case, Tony.
Xenoblade Chronicles is the best way to play it. On what? The Switch. Yeah, it was great on the Wii.
I'm too busy bowling.
Who's going to buy the original Xenoblade Chronicles or the original Wii version of a lot of these games that they could play on the Switch better and probably cheaper because they don't have to hunt them down. They could just play them. Oh, it's like 40, 50, 60 bucks in the Switch shop. Cool. Okay. So the Switch is a better Wii overall.
I can't. I rest my case, Tony. We'll leave it at that. All right. Jake James, what do you think about the Wii?
So there's a couple problems with your argument, and a lot of it has to do both in and out of the actual Wii as a console, okay? Because the Wii, the reason why it found that quick success is because it relied on a gimmick, and a gimmick that Nintendo could not sustain. And the biggest issue with the Wii was that it brought people to play games and it made it appealing for that time frame, but it was also not sustainable afterwards. And I think also part of it, I think you failed to mention, was that it was done by design, not by limitation. It was Nintendo's fault of why they couldn't continue it, specifically with the Virtual Console. Virtual Console was basically emulation. So it's a little hard to put that together with backwards compatibility because later consoles obviously had the ability to emulate games or older games that were on different, really kind of like, dead hardware and stuff. And that's fine. You could say the same thing about PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, the Wii Virtual Console, or the eShop now for the Switch. The list goes on. But with the Wii specifically, it relied on a gimmick that got very popular very fast for a very short period of time. And then when the Wii U came out, it was completely shot. And that really did damage to Nintendo back in the day. I remember conversations of people were having fun. We laugh at it now, but back then we were having conversations of like, oh, is Nintendo done in the console space, which obviously now is crazy, but that was a real conversation people had. Now, the other thing too with backwards compatibility, other consoles prior to the Wii were able to do that. And I would argue that PlayStation 2 had better backwards compatibility because it did it by default at the time. And it also had many more games that were backwards compatible compared to the amount of games that were backwards compatible with the Wii. The other thing too is that a lot of those games that were on the PlayStation 2 library, a lot of people were, or PlayStation library, I should say, because it was PS2 had backwards compatibility with PlayStation 1 games. A lot of people were more willing to go back to a lot of those older games on their newer hardware with PlayStation 2 than they were with the Wii going back to the GameCube, because there's only a few select games that were really popular that people wanted to go back to. Smash Brothers, maybe Mario Sunshine, maybe Metroid Prime. There's a few select titles like that, but not the majority of the console's library. And it's nice to have that. A lot of consoles back then had that because it was a selling point, and backwards compatibility became more diminished as consoles kind of went forward. We didn't really get that with PlayStation 4. We didn't get that really with Nintendo Switch, obviously, going back to Wii U and Wii in some capacities. Same thing with Xbox. I mean, Xbox now has a little bit of a different handling with it with Xbox Series X, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, etc. But the Wii was a good console, but not for a very long time. And as far as being a great console, the greatest console like that, it was so much of an insignificant amount of time compared to other consoles that are options that it really, to me, doesn't really stand up to it. And it definitely doesn't stand up to the tides of time because more people are willing to go back to other Nintendo consoles than they would the Wii for many different reasons. And let's be honest, the reason why there was a lot of bad games on the Wii in general in the library is because of that fad. There was a lot of shovelware on there because of the gimmick of the motion controls and stuff. There was a lot of inferior ports trying to capitalize on the gimmick of motion controls with the Wiimote and many other different peripherals that were out there. Again, the Mario Kart Wii like steering wheel, the different stuff with the instruments for Rock Band and Guitar Hero. There was a lot of different things. There was let's not forget, your console has the skateboard for Tony Hawk. Like that in of itself is a crime. Like bad enough. That was just there. That was expensive buy-in and it just did not work. And then don't even get me started on the Sonic the Hedgehog game. The point is, though, is that it had a lot of reliance on the fad of motion controls, which was great technology and great movement forward with the type of experiences we could get. But as far as the staying power, especially long after since the consoles left, I don't think it holds up with water.
All right. So I have, that's, you make great points. And I think, I'm not going to, I can't rebuttal those points, but what I can do is point out three different things. Simplicity. It didn't try to be the most advanced motion control ever. When it launched, the motion controls were kind of basic because then later they released like a pro version or whatever. And they tried to, like you said, keep up because they couldn't sustain it. But the simplicity of it is what made it successful and fun for a short period of time. And it was successful. It's actually the second highest selling or third highest selling console of all time. People loved it. Second thing, timeless. If you want to be timeless, a console, greatest console of all time, has to be timeless, withstand the test of time. If you want to be timeless, you can't rely on always being the most advanced because, Alex, like you were saying in your argument, there's always going to be a more advanced thing coming down the line. So for the greatest console of all time, you have to be timeless. So that means you have to double down on what you could do in that moment. So at release, that's what I'm talking about with the Wii. If you break out a Wii right now, you know what you're going to get, and it did it well for that time. You're going to have fun with what it had, not for what it can do, because there's always going to be a more advanced console coming out. And that leads into my third thing. Everybody also, like nowadays, they buy and they break out the PS2. What's the one other console that you see people break out if they don't have it under their TV right now? And that's a Wii. That's all I have to say. Rest my case.
I'll add one more rebuttal to this because you mentioned about how getting everybody to play games with the Wii and stuff. That only did it within those households that had a Wii. PlayStation 2 actually got into more households. It actually, like by default, it actually put itself in more households that people that were not gaming or didn't have games, as part of their lifestyle, whatever else, entertainment and stuff. Because again, Wii was a fad where it resonated with people that were into games, resonated to people that were excited about being able to play games like that. But I would argue that as within that small period of time, even then, it still didn't get into even more households beyond just that group that was excited about Nintendo or just knew about Nintendo. And PlayStation 2 did that literally, and it still does today. But again, like I think also keep in mind when it comes to being timeless, like you mentioned there, a lot of people, like I said, just won't go back to Wii or even think of the Wii as one of their first Nintendo consoles to go back to. Because if you want to talk about timeless with a Nintendo platform, I would argue that the Super Nintendo or the NES is probably more timeless than the Wii in many respects. And I love all those consoles. I love the Wii, but I just don't think it holds up. I don't know if I could really agree with it.
It's a great point. And then you just brought something to my memory too, which is a really cool point about the Wii. It was in a lot of households. It sold very well. And one thing that it did was it had a pack-in game. And you don't really see a lot of consoles do this anymore. They did this more so back in the day. But the Wii had a really cool pack-in game, and that was Wii Sports. So like I was saying, Wii Sports isn't the greatest game of all time, but it saved you money on a game because if you just bought the console, you already had an amazing game to play with friends and family with it, which I think was just a really cool aspect of the console itself. But I think consoles should do that more, nowadays. It was really cool. So, Kevin, don't say nothing bad about the Wii, man. Don't do it.
Again, with these consoles, I mean, like, I do love them. But when you're talking about the greatest, like, you really got to get down and gritty with the details. And, I mean, Jake hit it dead on. Kind of my thought process was it leaned on a niche. It's great for a unique console because there's nothing like it. But there's a reason, and I was going to say this, well, if it was so great, why didn't they continue it? Well, they tried, and they couldn't, and it failed. And now they're a completely different, they're looking at a completely different type of console nowadays with a Switch. The Switch, that we're looking to upgrade a Switch.
They should call the next one a Switch.
The Switch. They're not looking, hey, how can we get back to our Wii days? They're really trying to move on. Um, the whole
Well,
the whole backwards compatibility thing, for me, it's just such a weak argument for anyone who's mentioned it. Backwards compatibility is a very great thing early on. Like with the PS5, hey, am I going to be able to play my PS4 games, or am I limited to these 3, 4 launch games for a year and a half? That's a very early on, necessity for consumers that are wanting to upgrade, wanting to questioning whether they want to spend the extra 300, 400, or in this case $200 to move on or continue. And so it really doesn't hold at the end of its life term. Like I'm not looking at the end of a 4-year, 10-year with a Wii. Okay, well, can I play my, at this point 5, 6, 7-year-old GameCube game? It's just not something I care about at that point. I do like it, but on a mobility, which we've talked about on a mobility argument, it's got to be one of the worst. I mean, the the motion control was very iffy at times. And there was a lot of gimmicks, like he mentioned, with the skateboard, the Mario Kart wheel. I know for us, we had the yoga board where you could be able to like exercise with it. And for me, those haven't come back because they just don't last. And the Wii is it's a great for like a party. Like, hey, if you want to get together with, a bunch of friends and have a couple hours of fun, awesome. Perfect. Pull out the Wii. But when you're on your own time, like I just could never see myself really going back with the how weak it was at the time, like the ports to the Wii. This is why like could never pick a Wii. Is the games are just inherently going to be weaker, and they're not going to be graphically the same. They're not going to be control wise with a Wii. I mean, you're talking about completely different controls unless you had a controller, which personally I never even got to have or experience. So for that, I just couldn't say it's the greatest.
You make great points. I mean, what can I say? I'm trying. All right, Alex, end it out, man. I know you love the Wii. I can see it in your eyes.
Oh, I love the Wii. It was one of my favorite things. If you don't know it by now, Caleb, your wife loved the Wii when we were kids, which is my sister, everyone. And she got upsmacked in the head playing Wii tennis with Grandma.
You can't do that
Grandma
with
totally
modern consoles,
her,
all right?
and she got a new bump.
You don't make those
head.
memories nowadays.
So I have to say that though, when he speaks about the Wii, it's a good I would say staple.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was led up to. So I want to say most consoles are, display, box, controller, display, box, controller, display. When I mean box, I mean the system, controller. And we got to the PS2. The PS2 actually had a little bit of things that made the Wii more enjoyable. If you had enough money, you would have heard something called the PS2i.
The iToy.
I don't know if anyone you remember that. It's where you hooked up. It would look at you and you could do this, and it would
PlayStation
move your hands.
Yeah,
and you could basically be on the TV and control the game in a way. That was awesome. Now you have a controller to control the game, but it's a movement. It's not only buttons, but now the controller is reacting to your movement. Now, you could say the PSI, but they didn't have a controller. You were the controller at the moment, but a controller is now activating the movements. And that kind of set a nice precedent for the gaming industry, because you might say, oh, it died. You had the Wii U that you could move the controller. You have the Switch controllers, they move and you can control the game via that way. That's awesome. You even have the PS3. I played Until Dawn. If you move the controller at the end, you get killed. It senses your vibration. It was something cool. For forever after the Wii, every controller, well, most Xbox, I don't care about them. But they if you could move the controller, you could affect the game depending on the game, and that was awesome. And now I would say the better version, in my opinion, would be VR headsets because you can now control even more. It's basically what a Wii controller or a Switch controller that's off the system. You know, it's at a good history. Now, as for the best, no, I had a best times back in the day using the Switch.
That's what matters here.
But,
all right, remember that.
But I also had the best times with the PS2, the PS3. Because it's just part of my life. It was one of the best parts of my life. All of them would do it. They're good memorabilia, but I don't know if I would say they're the best, but they were awesome back in the day.
Well, I'm not saying you're wrong, but I rest my case. I think I tried it. I was gonna originally argue GameCube because that's up there, but Wii was just special. So, all right, you've heard my arguments for the Wii. Alex, we've heard yours for your pick. Okay. Kevin, we heard yours right for the PS3, Jake James, PS2, and Tony Quinn, the stinky Switch. So everyone just think about what argument was the best. Who had the best rebuttals? Who made the best argument? You know what I mean? You can't vote for yourself, all right? Because we already know what you're...
Don't let your feelings get involved, too, because you have to think logically.
Yeah, it's logical, all right? All right, so you obviously know what your favorite, your greatest game of all time is your pick. So you can't pick that one. You got to pick someone else's. So Tony, we know yours is the Switch. Great, great job. If you had to pick one other one from one of us, what is it and why?
I mean, I think from a certain point of view, all of you did great, in one way or another. Like, all the arguments had like a unique way to look at it, because like some of us are more knowledgeable about certain things than others. But I mean, I'm going to pick the really predictable answer and say that I think Jake James made great arguments for the PS2, not just because he knows about like all the spec stuff, but I mean, he is right. Like, a lot of like, you look at, I'd say with the like PS3 is really close because you could say like Uncharted 1 kind of set the precedent for like third person shooter adventure games that we have now, at least for a while, until The Last of Us kind of ruined it because now everything's over the shoulder. But that's a different conversation.
That's actually a great point.
I'm not saying Last of Us is bad. I'm just saying it kind of ruined gaming in a way.
All right. Let's no one go down this rabbit hole, okay?
But not like, you look at, RPGs. Final Fantasy X, that was the first Final Fantasy with voice acting, and like it set like a bigger precedent. Like, Final Fantasy has always been like really ambitious, telling big epic stories, has great music, lovable characters that people love. But like Final Fantasy X was when it went to that next level. People were like, RPGs could do, Final Fantasy VII was that for PS1, but there were still some things that made it like all the other ones, and that Final Fantasy X was like, check this out, boom, and it just went up. And then you talk about, I badmouth the first Devil May Cry game, but I mean, that was the genesis for like hack and think of all the hack and slash franchises we have now. Bayonetta, No More Heroes, stuff like that. We wouldn't have that if it wasn't for Devil May Cry. That was just iconic in terms of that, and in terms of creating all these characters that people love. It had an interesting lore, interesting aesthetics. And then, like a lot of, I would argue that like the Ratchet and Clank series and stuff inspired a lot of
now you're talking
action adventure platformers that we would get, right down the line. Same thing with Jak and Daxter. And that was on the PS2. So I feel like, yeah, in terms of the best console, I mean, I would say like PS2 has, as IGN says, a little something for everybody. And it encompasses all those different aspects, I think, a little more than all the rest of your picks, except PC, because, I mean, that's kind of a different argument, in my opinion. So I mean, yeah, I'd say he made his case for why PS2 was kind of in the middle of all these webs that we have now.
All right. I like it. I like it. Jake James with one. All right, we're actually going to skip down a little bit. Alex, we know yours, okay, but we don't know out of the four of us who you're going to pick. So if you had to pick one of the arguments, whose is it?
If I have to, if I was sitting here and I had to be honest with you, the arguments in my thinking is, what would I want if I could have that console and that be the only console I can play with because it's the greatest? I would have to say, I don't. The Switch, though it's new, I just can't. Some of the games is just like it's kind of like, oh, to me. Okay, this is just me. So I had to go with the PS3. I love the Wii. I love the Switch, and the PS2 was phenomenal back in the day. But if I want something for the rest of my life to play because it's the greatest out of the what you guys have, I would have to go with the PS3.
Can't fault you for that. I love the reasoning. So, all right, Kev, you got one up there on the board. PlayStation's dominating. All right, Jake James. What would be your pick besides, your own PS2? Great arguments. You did a great job. So, who else, if you had to say, made the best argument for greatest game of all time, greatest game console of all time? Who would it be?
I think, again, it's very hard.
It is,
not being able to choose my own. If I had to pick from any of the ones that you guys have put out there, or at least argued for, I would probably have to say the Switch. Because, again, the only reason why I would say the Switch with Tony's argument is because with PS3, I feel like, again, it was just so limited with the cell processor, even though the games were good and there was other things that were going on with it. It was everything outside of it, and the willingness of devs wanting to develop games for it that I think held it back, that in a way that wasn't really prominent in other game consoles. With the Wii, again, I still feel like a lot of its success was because it was a fad at the time that really contributed heavily to its success, and things just were not the same for it afterwards, or at least the same right after with the Wii U. It just didn't continue afterwards, and its relevance in this grand scheme of things with other consoles, I just don't think holds up as much as we like games around the Wii. And with the PC argument, I just don't think it's in the same ballpark of the conversation that we're all having stuff. So out of those choices, I would say the Switch, because at least it's a console that's trying to do things both home and portable, just overall like that. It has games, even though I still feel like it has a lot of flaws with the ports and other aspects, that, just don't make it as great of an experience, or at least have as many great experiences compared to other consoles of its era and stuff. But out of those choices, I would still give it to the Switch, given all the choices that we had at this point.
This is actually really tough. What a great argument for the Switch. All right, Kevin. You know what it is right now. You can't pick the PS3. I know you love it. I love it. If you can't pick the PS3, what would you pick? What's the greatest console of all time out of these arguments you heard?
Man, this is tough.
It really is.
For me, are we ranking it off of? Okay, so I obviously can't pick my own. We're all gonna think that we're right. So are we picking it based off of other people's answers, or the debate, the argument, the presentation, the points?
Kind of both. Kind of the both in the same. Yeah. How did they portray their arguments for it being the greatest of all time?
It's just interesting because for Jake to pick Tony, the Switch, when he gave a better argument for the Switch than Tony. So,
hey, there's no rules, man. Tony's sitting there loving it.
Tony's
no rules, yeah.
And I'm glad you said it. So PC is up there, correct? PC is considered an option. Yes or no?
There's no rules.
In my book,
no rules.
There's no rules.
Because that's
me. If we're gonna be honest, it's an option. A, B, C, D.
You can do whatever you want, bro.
PC is up there, so I'm gonna make a better argument than Alex. PC is gonna be my pick. PC's gonna be my
You're
pick.
so dumb.
PC's gonna be my pick because console is always trailing behind it. Whether the PC was made for gaming or not, it's up here. This is a conversation. This is our own little debate, and it's an option. So I gotta take it seriously. PC is always ahead than console. Console is always trying to mimic, always trying to catch up. When we're talking about what's a more powerful console, if PC even is a console, which right now it is considered, PC is better. Which one is more accessible? PCs. You can go down to a local library and log on into a PC. They're at jobs. They're at everywhere. Switches are not. Switches are not up there, or any of our other, you know, what we consider an actual console.
I hope you know I'm going to be clipping this, and you're going to get flamed on YouTube Shorts.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. I'm okay. You know, I've been given a curveball right now, and I'm kind of flustered. But with the PC, I mean, like the amount of game, if we're talking about game catalog, I mean, you literally don't get bigger than PC. PC can run any game. At this point, Xbox is a PC. I mean, like when we're talking about game catalog, they're one and the same. One and the same. At PlayStation, okay, I just gotta wait a year. I just gotta wait 2 years. Boom, PlayStation games are on PC. I guess I'm not up to date with the situation of the Wii, but I know there's a lot of emulators. If we're gonna, like, so technically you can play Wii games on PC.
Well, you can. I just looked it up as Dolphin.
Yeah.
You can get a Dolphin emulator and play Wii Sports.
Awesome, boom. Whether that's illegal or frowned upon, it is technically up there.
Okay.
If
Great
we're gonna
art.
talk about this, don't worry, I'm at it. If we're gonna talk about the greatest console, we're not gonna talk about the argument. We're talking about the greatest console. I'm gonna have to go with PC.
All right. Well, Alex got one. Thanks for picking me, guys. But all right. But I guess I'm the tiebreaker here. But actually, before that, Jake James, you might be the only one here that knows what I'm talking about. If you're following some of this on Twitter or X or whatever, was it Jez Gordon that said cloud is console? You know what I'm talking about with the?
I think I remember that, and I think that's so like.
That's what this is reminding me of.
Weird. That's such a weird conversation, weird argument. Like sometimes I don't even listen to Jez. I read it. And I was like, yeah, whatever. Like there's a lot of things. Like they with Jeff Grubb, he'll be saying some wild stuff on social media and such. But I think that cloud gaming is like a feature from different types of stuff, because you could technically play games off the cloud on a television screen. And you could say the same thing about various different consoles and all this stuff. I think cloud gaming is a feature. I don't think it's necessarily a console, but again, it gets into very weird semantics and just like trying to define something that just feels so awkward and like in this weird space. I don't know.
And what's funny is we love to talk about this and the semantics of it, but at the end of the day, these companies are making so much money off of us. You know what I mean? From all this. So it's like they don't care what the definition of it is, but it's just this is what it reminds me of, is that argument, which I don't listen to him either, but that with the Amazon Fire Stick, you can now play Xbox games on the Amazon Fire Stick.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's like a feature. It's like trying to connect to Game Pass or something, or stream games through the cloud for Xbox games. Like it's just really weird. Like to me, I don't consider that a console. I consider that a device that has like a feature.
Now the argument for I believe he said, what's the difference between playing on a console that's in your living room versus playing on a console that's in a warehouse somewhere?
The difference is that it's an actual unit you buy and a fixed unit of technology. That's the thing. Like, you can't say that the stick is a unit. I mean, because again, you can say the same thing about a flash drive or whatever else. But the point is, like, when we talk about consoles and the gaming space and in the industry and stuff, we're talking about actual console units like that, or what we've traditionally known as consoles like that, because then you get into this other weird technological debate or argument about stuff that I just don't think, sometimes it's all about whataboutisms at that point.
And I'm glad you're on here just to kind of shed some light on that too, because I agree with you, and it's just so much. It's just semantics, and it's everyone wants to be right about it, and there's no clear definitions, but we're trying to make our case. You know what I mean?
People overcomplicate it.
Yeah, overcomplicating it,
like really big time.
Yeah. I agree. So my pick, and it actually comes down to something very specific, which is just a great point that I'm trying not to be biased here, because I'm so biased towards one and against the other. but I have to pick the PS2, and mostly because of the fact it's in everyone's household. The Switch is not far off. The Switch is at 141 million units, and the PS2 is at 155. And the PS2 is the highest selling, which it's not all about sales. It doesn't matter. But you made a good point when you said it's in more people's households. There's more people playing it. So when you talk about the greatest, there's more people that have played and are still playing a PS2, and the catalog on top of the numerous other reasons. The catalog, it even had fun peripherals like the iToy or the PSI or whatever. So, which I played, it was fun. It was
Also, it started Guitar Hero. Like that, the whole music.
Oh, you're right. I didn't even think about that.
Started Guitar Hero, like literally, that whole genre was kickstarted by that one franchise, which I think really started on PlayStation 2. Now I think about it, because they had it on 360 afterwards. I don't think they had they didn't have it on the original Xbox. They didn't have it on GameCube. They had it on Wii, but I think that was all after PS2, because Guitar Hero 1 and 2 and some of the other games are mostly started on PlayStation 2. I believe. I'm pretty sure. I'm right about that.
I'm looking it up. Yeah, you might.
Then after that, then you got DJ Hero, then you got Rock Band, then you got all these other like third party, like outside of Harmonix style of like music games. SingStar. The list goes on.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm reading it here. That's also an interesting point. It's going to be hard to like trying to just be non-biased. It's going to be hard to surpass the PS2 and all of the points that you made. I think Switch comes the closest to it. Bias, if I'm being completely biased, I think I actually might pick PS5, but it's not over yet. And then PS3 is up there, but that's just me being biased. But I think the points made for both Switch and PS2 are actually very close. So yeah.
Now, luckily, there's that term video game console, because if not, PC is in more houses than any of your consoles.
You use a computer to do other things that aren't related to gaming. That's not even an argument.
Let's not forget PC exclusives like RuneScape, and we also have World of Warcraft and League of Legends. Those are very.
I'm pretty sure you can play RuneScape on your phone. Actually, you can buy it in the App Store.
They finally made one. You're right.
Yeah.
It's no longer exclusive. You're right.
And that's the only PC exclusive you were able to come up with. So I mean, I don't know.
Well, every PS2 game.
Personally, that's all I got. I'm just trying. Club Penguin. That's
See, there you go.
Stuff like that. That was accessible to all kids, even in school.
What an argument!
You played a lot of games in school, didn't you?
No, I did my work. What are you talking about?
Yeah, you didn't go on to those.
And
everything else.
Yeah, that's basically the only thing I ever did.
You got Newgrounds. We caught you.
Newgrounds, exactly.
I don't think we didn't expose you like that. We saw you on Newgrounds playing the Xena Warrior Princess game. What's wrong with you?
Oh, snap.
I did it too. And by the way, I take it because I think I'm the oldest one here. I was playing Number Munchers back in elementary school on IBM computers and Oregon Trail. And where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? So I get it. I was even playing the Mask of Zorro. Zorro back in the day on IBM computers. The point is, it's like that whole discussion again gets way too out there. It's like what you were saying with the cloud gaming thing. It becomes needlessly overly complicated when we're trying to talk about specifically consoles. Because when we're talking about consoles, we're talking about the traditional sense of home consoles that we've all come to know as we were growing up. Because I think that then you have a much more stronger case for whatever the pick might be. Whatever.
I think next time it should be pure video game consoles. Meaning it's solely intended for video games.
Yeah, we should have been more specific, guys. Come on.
Because
okay.
you could, like you said, the fridge and Tamagotchis or something. Well, the Tamagotchi, no one.
Hey, hold up. I like the Tamagotchi, man. It's my favorite console. But no, that's what's fun about it. There's no rules. Like, you guys just make whatever argument you want to make. I don't care. And you all failed at that. So, anyways.
Okay.
That was a lot of fun. I'm going to get a lot of good clips out of that. And there were just, you guys' reactions were so funny. So thank you guys.
I want the clip of everyone.
Yeah, it was amazing. Thank you guys for
everyone flew back in their
giving some good arguments and participating and stuff. I know it was know it was frustrating.
I've only walked away from my camera like one other time on the whole show.
But that's it for that. Episode 50 was a lot of fun. Greatest console of all time. What a topic. I mean, it's not an easy answer at all. It's very, very difficult. So we had some good arguments. We're gonna end it now, so we can just go around. Kevin, thank you for coming on. It'll be all right, man.
Thanks for having me.
Tony, thanks for being the co-host, and you did a great job. Sorry, the stinky switch is still stinky. All right, Alex, thanks for coming on, and you doing what you do. That's all I can say.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate this time.
And we're gonna leave. So Jake James, once again, thank you for coming on. It was a lot of fun. This is such a fun, interesting topic. Great insight, great banter. We had some good conversations. So with that, we're gonna end it. Thanks for coming on, guys, and we'll see you all next time.